The warmth of their blood on my face was a lie. Not mine, not yet. A hair's breadth. That's all it took for another poor bastard's brains to decorate the cold steel floor instead of my own. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of survival, fear, and the sickening realization that I was already knee-deep in a slaughterhouse, and the real show hadn't even begun. My vision, still swimming with the ghost of a falling body, clung to the impossible, indifferent gleam of the fluorescent lights high above, their incessant hum a perverse lullaby in this mausoleum of steel and despair. It felt like a lifetime had passed since the sterile white van had snatched me off that desolate highway, since the muffled voices and the sudden prick of a needle had stolen my last sliver of autonomy. Now, standing among 100 terrified strangers in an arena that swallowed sound, the echoes of that betrayal still clung to me, a faint metallic taste on my tongue. This was the opportunity they'd promised, wasn't it? The grand prize, the life-changing sum. Just another bait and switch, a cruel joke whispered by the universe specifically for me. My hand, without conscious thought, found the cold steel of my worn analog wristwatch, tracing the rim of its face, not for the time, never for the time, just a small, familiar anchor in a world that had, once again, tilted off its axis. The room was too large to be real, a stadium-like arena designed to make 100 souls feel utterly insignificant. Its high metal walls towered over us like prison bars, or perhaps the polished, clinical sides of a dissection chamber. The cold, industrial glow of fluorescent lights, buzzing like trapped insects, hummed faintly above, casting a pale, sterile light onto the players. 99 of us now. I reminded myself with a fresh wave of nausea. We stood in stiff, uneasy lines, our breath shallow, eyes darting nervously, searching for answers in each other's panicked faces. The air, thick with unspoken fear, tasted of sweat, of desperation, and of something acrid, metallic. The lingering ghost of fear from the ones who had been here before us. Perhaps, or maybe, the scent of the one who had just joined them. A voice, mechanical and detached, blared from unseen speakers, cutting through the low murmur of our collective dread like a scalpel. Welcome, esteemed players. Congratulations on making it this far. Esteemed players, my ass, I thought, my lips barely twitching. We're cattle, or maybe just the entertainment. My leather jacket, my only true companion for years, felt heavier than usual on my shoulders, a familiar weight that somehow offered no comfort in this alien, unforgiving space. It always did this world. Drag me in, chew me up, spit me out, just another Tuesday. You have been chosen to participate in a series of games, each one designed to test your strength, your intelligence, and your will to survive. The prize? A life-changing sum of $45.6 billion. The cost of failure? Your life. A sharp, cynical laugh threatened to claw its way up my throat. $45 billion. Right. And I was supposed to believe they just stumbled upon 100 random schmucks to offer this to. My kind of luck, though. The kind that offers you a pot of gold, then tells you it's buried at the bottom of a live volcano. This wasn't a game, it was a trap. Every cell in my body screamed to bolt, to find a crack in the wall, a loose vent, anything that could lead me out of this steel coffin. But years of experience, of encountering the inexplicable horrors the world seemed so keen on throwing my way, had taught me that these places rarely had convenient exits, and the ones that did usually led to something worse. Before we begin, let us remind you of the rules. There will be no quitting once the games have commenced. Any attempt to break the rules will result in immediate elimination. Your only path forward is to play, to win, to survive. The words echoed, chillingly clear. No quitting. That settled it then. No easy way out. just the long, hard slog through whatever fresh hell they had cooked up. My eyes scanned the faces around me. A young woman with her hair pulled back tightly, eyes wide and fixed on the unseen speakers. An older man, his face a roadmap of worry lines, kept clenching and unclenching his fists. A muscular guy, probably thought he could punch his way out, was already looking for a weakness in the steel walls. All of them, just like me, had been lured here by some improbable promise, probably out of desperation or foolish hope. Hope, that was the real killer. I'd lost mine years ago, somewhere in the ashes of a house that shouldn't have burned, leaving me with only the grim knowledge that survival was an endless, exhausting marathon. Now, the first game will begin. This is Red Rover. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Red Rover, that old playground game? A few players exchanged glances, confusion momentarily outweighing fear. My own mind snagged on the name. It felt wrong, like calling a meat grinder a tickle machine. Too innocent, too benign for this place, this voice, this overwhelming sense of dread. The rules are simple. Players will be divided into two lines, facing each other. When your name is called, you must run. Your goal is to break through the linked hands of the opposing line. The faster you run, the better your chance of survival. I snorted internally. Simple. Nothing was ever simple. Simple got you killed. Simple was what they said right before the bottom dropped out. However, be warned, resistance will be stronger than expected. Failing to break through may result in severe consequences. The voice paused, a dramatic beat that left the air vibrating with unspoken menace. Remember, hesitation is not an option. Strength alone will not save you. Only those who adapt will move forward. Adapt, right. Always a good buzzword in a corporate hellscape. Here, it sounded like a death sentence delivered with a smile. If you fail, you will be eliminated. The murmurs died instantly. A hush fell over the room, thick and suffocating. The buzzing of the light seemed to intensify, burrowing into my skull. My hand gripped the watch again, the metal cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the sudden clamminess of my palm. "What do they mean by eliminated?" someone whispered, their voice barely more than a breath, brittle with a terror that was about to become universal. A chill ran down my spine, a cold serpent uncoiling in my gut. The word lingered in the air, heavy, suffocating. The mechanical voice had said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, but now it clawed at my mind like something dark and inescapable, pulling on old, familiar scars. Then the realization slammed into me, cold and sharp as a surgeon's blade. Eliminated doesn't mean removed. It doesn't mean sent home. It doesn't mean you pack your bags and get a consolation prize. It means dead. It meant a dirt nap or a steel floor nap, as the case may be. The air in my lungs turned to stone. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs, too loud, too fast. A frantic drummer beating a rhythm of impending doom. My fingers curled into fists, nails digging into my palms. The small pain a desperate attempt to ground myself in reality. I glanced at the faces around me, some still wearing faint traces of confusion, others already pale with dread, their eyes mirroring the horror I felt blossoming in my own chest. A couple of them, the optimists, were still looking around like there was a hidden camera, like this was all some elaborate prank show. Bless their naive little hearts. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. We were never meant to walk away from this easily. We were never meant to just lose a game. We were meant to die. This was a meat locker, and we were the livestock. A bitter wave of regret washed over me, suffocating, relentless. This was supposed to be a simple game, something ridiculous, something I could laugh about later. Run, break a line, go home with some money. That was the illusion I had allowed myself to believe, probably out of some lingering, idiotic sliver of hope that the universe wasn't always out to get me. But now, The truth was carved into the walls, written in the blood pooling at our feet. This wasn't just a game, it was a hunt, and we were the prey. The old, familiar chill of true terror. The one that meant the rules of the world had just broken, just like they did that night, years ago, when the only game was survival, and the prize was just drawing another breath. My chest tightened. The realization was paralyzing, but I couldn't afford to freeze. If I stopped moving, if I hesitated for even a second, I'd be next. I had to win. I had to push everything else aside. The horror, the fear, the sickening churn in my gut. There's no turning back. No go bag waiting by a door I could flee through. The only way out was forward, through the blood, through the chaos, through the bodies that would inevitably fall before this was over. I clenched my fists, forcing my breath to steady. I would survive. I had to. Because if I didn't, who would remember the absurdity of it all? 2 groups of 50 were formed, standing opposite each other. The distance between us was unnervingly vast, a stretch of polished concrete that felt like a runway to hell. Too much space for something simple, too much room for something to go horribly wrong. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My number, 045, was displayed on my uniform in stark black ink, a mark of my existence in this twisted game. Just a number, stripped of identity, reduced to something disposable. My mind raced, replaying every decision that led me here. Did I really think this was just a game? That I would play, win some money, and walk away? The realization slammed into me. There is no walking away, only moving forward or falling like the others. A monitor flickered to life above us, displaying a random name. The first sacrifice. Player 089, step forward. A young man, no older than 20, stumbled out, eyes wide with disbelief, his mouth working. No, please, Then, just for a moment, a flicker of relief washed over my face. Relief that it wasn't my number called. A bitter, fleeting breath escaped my lips before I even realized it. But it's short-lived, chased immediately by a sickening guilt that gripped my stomach. I shouldn't feel relieved. I shouldn't feel anything but dread. Because soon, my turn would come, and I had a feeling the universe had a special kind of dread reserved just for me. A click sounded from above, sharp and precise. A turret emerged from the ceiling, its metallic whine barely audible, locking onto him with an almost casual grace. It was a kill mechanism, sleek and utterly devoid of humanity. Step forward or be eliminated immediately. His legs moved before his brain did. Shaking, he took a hesitant step forward, but then his body locked up, a terrified statue. His eyes darted to the sides, searching for an escape, for someone to save him, for a flicker of compassion. He found none. His breath quickened. Then, suddenly, he whirled around as if to run back, to somehow escape the unseen gaze of the turret, a final, desperate, futile act of defiance. A sharp twang pierced the air, impossibly loud in the sudden, absolute silence. A single arrow, a blur of gleaming steel, tore through his skull with brutal efficiency, the impact jerking his body backward as if yanked by an invisible string. Blood sprayed outward, a sickening crimson mist, warm and thick, splattering against my face. My breath caught, a jagged gasp. The wet metallic scent filled my nostrils, turning my stomach. Screams erupted from the crowd, raw and primal. Chaos unfurled like a storm. Players stumbled back, hands clamped over their mouths, eyes wide with terror. Someone dropped to their knees, sobbing, the sound echoing hollowly. My own body trembled, a tremor that started in my knees and rattled up through my chest. I lifted a trembling hand to my cheek, my fingers coming away slick and red, the warmth of the blood a gruesome testament to the horror. The truth was undeniable now. There was no mercy here. No mistakes. No second chances. Step forward when called. Hesitation will not be tolerated. The voice crackled from the speakers, mechanical and cold, as if nothing had just happened, as if a life, a singular, unique human existence, had not just been stolen in an instant. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. My legs felt like they might collapse beneath me. This isn't a game. It's an execution, a production, and we were the unwilling actors. Red Rover had begun. One by one, names were called. Each runner faced the same choice: break through or die. The arbitrary nature of it all was almost as terrifying as the violence. They could have picked any of us. They would pick any of us. My eyes tracked each desperate sprint, each brutal impact. Some made it, their bodies colliding into the linked arms with savage force, the sheer momentum sending players sprawling across the cold, unyielding floor. A few managed to stumble forward, chests heaving, eyes wide with the manic gleam of those who had just escaped death's grip. The moment they crossed the invisible line, their knees buckled, some collapsing onto the floor in shaking relief, their hands clutching at their throats as if still gasping for air. A mix of hysterical laughter and strangled sobs rippled through the survivors. But none of them looked victorious, only haunted, like they'd stared into the abyss and it had grinned back. They looked exactly how I felt. Others weren't so lucky. Some were caught mid-air, their ribs crushed between locked arms, a sickening crunch that made my teeth ache. Some hit the ground wrong, snapping their own limbs in the process, their screams cut short by the swift, silent arrow. And for those who failed, for those who simply didn't break through, the floor panel beneath them yawned open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a black abyss. The elimination followed, swift and final, a quiet thud and then silence. No screams from below, just the cold, mechanical hum and the knowledge that one more was gone. I watched, my hands sweating, my heartbeat a deafening roar in my ears, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. Each death was a fresh crack in the fragile wall of my composure, another layer of scar tissue over an already raw soul. Then, the screen flickered again. My breath hitched. I knew this feeling. The universe was tightening its grip. Player 045, step forward. My number. My breath hitched. My heart hammered, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. My name, or rather, my assigned identity, echoing through the cavernous space. I didn't move. Not because I refused, but because my legs wouldn't work. They were suddenly made of lead, rooted to the cold, unforgiving floor. A sharp beep sounded overhead, a cold, mechanical signal that felt like the tolling of a death bell. My breath stuttered, my muscles stiffened, cold and unresponsive. Move! Move now, you idiot! I forced one foot forward, but the weight of terror anchored me down, a crushing, invisible force. My body felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away, a detached observer to my own impending demise. The vast, empty space ahead yawned like an abyss, its silence more terrifying than the screams behind me, more chilling than the thought of the turret above. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. My legs trembled violently. I took another step, a clumsy, desperate shuffle. Then, instinct kicked in, raw and animalistic, overriding the paralysis. A primal scream from the deepest, oldest part of my brain, the part that had survived Sycamore Grove, the part that had kept me moving from town to town. My body recoiled, as if some unseen force was shoving me backward, away from the path of the unseen arrow. My breath was ragged, my pulse erratic, thundering in my ears. My vision blurred for a moment, panic pressing against my ribs like a vice, sucking the air from my lungs. I can't do this. I have to turn back. I have to run. I have to escape. I twisted, my body moving before my mind could catch up. A desperate lurch to the side, away from the spotlight, Then, a sharp click, a deafening twang, a blur of steel, a searing whistle through the air. Something hot splashed across my cheek. I froze. The room spun. My breath shuddered as I lifted a trembling hand to my face. My fingers came away wet, warm, red, not mine. A body collapsed beside me with a sickening thud, a hollow sound against the concrete. The lifeless eyes of another player stared blankly up at the ceiling, unseeing, reflecting the cold fluorescent glow. An arrow, a cruel steel feather, protruded from their skull, blood pooling beneath them in slow, creeping tendrils, black in the sterile light. The screams began again, raw, horrified, deafening. My pulse hammered wildly as I forced myself to look away, my entire body shaking with the force of my breaths, a full-body dry heave threatening to overtake me. That could have been me. That almost was me. The universe, in its infinite cruelty, had decided to spare me, to let someone else take the hit, just like it always did. A survivor's guilt, an old, familiar ache coiled in my gut. Step forward when called. Hesitation will not be tolerated. The voice over the speakers was indifferent, void of emotion, as if announcing the arrival of a train rather than a death sentence. As if the blood still drying on my face was nothing but a smudge. I could still feel the warmth of the blood seeping into my skin, the sticky horror of it. This is no game. This is slaughter. My turn. My second chance. Purchased with someone else's life. I could feel the eyes of the other players on me, the survivors looking at me with a mixture of fear and, perhaps, the dawning understanding that this was a lottery of death, and I had just won one round. The opposing line was waiting. Among them, I saw a girl, Mina. I recognized her instantly. We met earlier, just before the game was announced, when the tension in the waiting area was almost unbearable. A quiet conversation, an exchange of nervous glances, a mutual understanding that we were both trapped in something far beyond our control. She had been calmer than most, sharper, analyzing the situation instead of panicking like the others. I remembered the way she sized me up, her eyes assessing, as if trying to decide whether I was an ally or just another obstacle to overcome. And now, standing in the line ahead of me, she met my gaze again, this time with something more than curiosity. Unlike the others, she wasn't trembling, she wasn't afraid, she was calculating. She watched me with sharp, calculating eyes, sizing me up, already thinking ahead. There was a flicker there, a silent challenge, or perhaps a warning. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Run!" It was a whisper in my head, the voice of pure, unadulterated instinct. I pushed off the ground. My body moved on instinct, legs pumping, arms swinging, breath burning in my lungs. Faster, faster. The concrete blurred beneath my worn boots. My eyes scanned the opposing line, a wall of strained faces and locked arms. Who looked the weakest? Who looked scared? Who looked like they were already giving up? I saw a tremor in one man's grip, a slight give in a woman's shoulder. I chose a weak point. Survival was about finding the crack in the wall, even if it meant breaking someone else in the process. My reluctant conscience gave a tiny, nearly imperceptible twitch, then quickly silenced itself. This wasn't the time for niceties. I lowered my shoulder and threw myself forward, all my weight behind the impact, a desperate, animalistic lunge, a sickening collision. My body slammed against locked arms, the force sending shockwaves through my bones, rattling my teeth. I heard a grunt of pain, a gasp. For a moment, nothing moved. The line held. My momentum stalled. No, not like this. Then what? With a sudden, tearing sound, the grip gave way. I fell forward, tumbling onto the rough concrete, chest heaving. My hands scraped against the ground, but I barely registered the pain. I made it. I was through. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air, lungs burning. I turned back, expecting relief, expecting to simply walk to the survivor's side of the arena. Instead, I saw Mina lying on the ground, a small cry escaping her lips. Her arm, the one that had locked with another, was bruised but intact. She grimaced, clutching it with a pained expression, but she was alive. I had aimed for the weakness. Yes, but her arms were part of the weak point. I had broken through her. I hesitated. I didn't know why. It was a stupid, dangerous instinct. My mind screamed at me to just move on, to not draw attention, to not get involved, but something, that persistent, irritating spark of conscience, caught me. Perhaps it was the shared terror, the brief, unspoken understanding between us in the waiting room. Perhaps it was just the exhaustion of being alone, always alone against the horrors of the world. Or perhaps it was the raw, undeniable fact that, in a way, I was responsible for her being on the ground. For the first time, I realized we were all just pieces on a board, moved by unseen hands, forced to destroy each other. And I had just done my part. I took a step forward, offering her my hand. She looked up at me, surprised, her sharp eyes searching mine, trying to decipher the intent. Then, slowly, she took it. Her grip was firm despite the pain. "Thanks," she muttered, standing shakily. Her gaze flickered to the turret, then to the unmoving body of the man who had died in my place. Her eyes were still calculating, but there was a flicker of something new there now. Shared burden, perhaps. I nodded, my voice rough. "We need to survive this." She glanced at the others, those who had yet to be called, then back at me, a long, assessing look. Then we watched each other's backs. I didn't know why, but I believed her. Maybe it was just the desperate hope of finding an ally in this hell. Or maybe, for once, my cynical gut was wrong. Maybe she meant it. My hand went to my wristwatch again, a silent, unconscious tick. Time was ticking, but it didn't matter what the hand said. All that mattered was the present moment, the next breath, the next arbitrary act of cruelty. The speakers crackled again. The next name was called. The game didn't stop. It never stops. I remained standing among the survivors, my body shaking, my mind reeling. The weight of what I just witnessed, what I'd just done, pressed down on me like a physical force, heavier than any regret I'd ever known. My breath was uneven, my vision blurred at the edges, the fluorescent lights seeming to pulse with a malevolent rhythm. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My jacket felt like a second skin, clinging to the sweat that now chilled me to the bone. This was just the first game. A cold shiver crawled up my spine as the realization settled in. A bone-deep certainty that echoed the desolate landscapes I drifted through for so long. If this was only the beginning, then what horrors awaited us next? The rules were clear. Each game would push us further, break us piece by piece. The blood on my skin, still warm, was a grim reminder that survival was not about winning. It was about enduring. It was about making sure you're not the one left behind, the one whose body is dragged away, while the rest of us pretend not to hear their last breath. My stomach churned. My fingers twitched at my sides. I had to survive. I had to keep moving, because running from this wasn't an option. The only option was through. The speakers crackled to life again. The next announcement was coming. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. The cycle of terror was about to begin again, and we were all still trapped inside it. And now, for the first time since stepping into this nightmare, I was not alone. Total character count, 9,987. The hunger is a living thing inside me now, a raw, gnawing void that eclipses thought, reason, and any lingering echo of the man I used to be. It's a primordial beast, ancient and insatiable, and it's coiling in the ruins of what was once my stomach, demanding to be fed, My throat, a shredded, gaping ruin, offers no protest, only a cold, hollow awareness of its own absence. My body, or what's left of it, aches with a profound, unnatural fatigue, yet pulses with a frantic, eager energy. I lie here, deep in the damp embrace of the woods, a patch of matted leaves and cold earth pressed against what used to be my face, and I can feel them. Teenagers, young, vibrant, their life energy radiating through the trees like a distant, flickering campfire. They wander nearby, probably looking for cheap thrills, a quiet place to drink or whisper secrets, entirely oblivious to the new predator that has joined the shadows. The sky above is a bruise of twilight, a fitting backdrop for this grim, grotesque rebirth, and my old analog wristwatch, somehow still clinging to my wrist, tells me nothing of the time, only a silent, damning indictment of how far I've fallen. It all started, as these things always do, with a quiet night, a sense of false security, and a knock at the door that felt less like a greeting and more like a premonition. Just another transient stop in another nameless town, a forgettable rental house that was supposed to be a temporary haven from the ever-present gnawing dread of my own existence. I'd told Buster, my scruffy terrier mix, that this one felt clean. He'd given me that look, the one that said, "You say that every time, Leo." I'd left him with Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, slightly deaf lady from the next town over who adored him, telling myself I just needed a quiet night to recharge. Fool, I should have known better. Quiet nights are just the universe winding its spring for the next jump scare. I was settled in the kitchen, the cool Formica counter against my forearms, my laptop humming a low, monotonous tune as I scrolled through the endless, meaningless digital chatter of social media. Another Tuesday night, another round of staring at digital strangers living lives I actively avoided. Lives where the biggest worry was probably what to have for dinner, or if the new streaming show was any good. My life, by contrast, had become a masterclass in low-profile survival, a perpetual state of ready to bolt. I checked my old analog wristwatch out of habit, the battered leather strap a familiar comfort against my skin, the glass face reflecting the dim kitchen light. 10:01 p.m. Time to call it a night. Maybe try to coax some actual sleep out of my perpetually agitated brain before another round of graveyard shift grunt work. The knock came then, sharp and insistent, rattling the cheap veneer of normalcy I'd built around myself. It was too loud for a neighbor, too urgent for a delivery. My hand twitched, nearly sending my lukewarm tea, herbal, because even my caffeine intake needed to be as bland as possible, cascading over the laptop. My heart, a weary, overworked muscle, leaped into my throat. Who the hell knocks like that at 10 p.m. in this quiet, dead-end neighborhood? XXPD, we're here answering an emergency call from this residence. Please open the door. The voice, gruff and no-nonsense, sliced through the thin kitchen walls. My mind scrambled, cycling through a Rolodex of past horrors. An emergency call? From my address? I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't heard anything. My paranoia, usually a low thrum beneath my skin, ratcheted up a notch, vibrating through my bones. Had one of them finally tracked me down? Were they trying a new tactic? I wasn't a hero, never claimed to be, but my gut was already clenching into a hard knot of dread. This wasn't a blizzard-choked road where sanity frayed at the edges, nor a polite dinner party where the host was the main course. This was worse. This was home, or what passed for it this week. I pushed away from the counter, the cheap laminate scraping under my weight, and padded across the living room carpet. Every step a hesitant whisper. The porch light, a weak yellow glow against the encroaching darkness, spilled a thin rectangle of light onto the floor through the glass panels of the front door. I peered through the peephole, a blurry, distorted view of two figures, police, or at least, men in uniforms. I unlatched the deadbolt, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the silence of the house, and pulled the door open a crack. The chill of the night air, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood, slid past me. Good evening, officers. I'm sorry, but you've probably made a mistake. I didn't make an emergency call, I said, forcing a tight, awkward smile. My voice sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing even to my own ears. The two officers on my porch, however, didn't react with the usual tired frustration I'd come to expect from law enforcement. No, they just stood there, unblinking, their expressions flat, too flat. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, stepped forward. "Hello, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm Officer Blythe, and this is my partner, Officer Duchamp." They even had name tags, stitched onto uniforms that looked less like standard issue, and more like they'd been dragged through a bramble bush and then left to dry in a dusty attic. Blythe's tag read Rainer Blythe, Duchamp's Greg Duchamp. Fine. My internal cynicism, usually a reliable shield, was already poking holes in their facade. They looked less like officers and more like they'd spent a week living in a dumpster behind a particularly aggressive kebab shop. Their skin had a strange ashen quality, almost like dried clay, and their eyes, too wide, too still. "We received a call from this address," Blythe continued, his gaze drifting past my shoulder, over my head, and settling on the dimly lit staircase leading to the second floor. The unlit hallway above seemed to absorb the meager light, becoming an inky black maw. The female caller claimed to hear the crawling sound of a large animal on the second floor while she was in the living room. "Do you live alone, ma'am? Is there another woman in your house?" My stomach dropped. A cold, hard plummet. A crawling sound. A female caller. This was already hitting too close to home, too close to the edge of the abyss I tried so hard to skirt. My own voice was sharper now, edged with a rising current of fear. "No, I live alone, and I am alone tonight. I really didn't hear anything abnormal, and I certainly didn't make or hear anyone make an emergency call. Are you sure you have the right address?" Blythe's eyes, devoid of any warmth or humor, finally met mine again. "Is your address XXXXXXX?" he asked, naming my street and number. "Yes, but..." I trailed off, the word a useless whisper. They had the right address. My discomfort, initially a mild unease, had now fully blossomed into a prickly, undeniable fear. My internal alarm bells, usually set to a polite, mild unease, had just upgraded to full-blown existential dread siren. "Well, ma'am, looks like we'll have to come in and have a check on things. You might have been entertaining some unwanted guests this whole evening." Blythe's tone was half joking, but his eyes held no mirth. He exchanged a glance with Duchamp, and it wasn't a silent chuckle, it was a silent understanding. Something chillingly predatory. I hated their casual flippancy, their almost gleeful air, but the wild, inky darkness behind them, stretching out beyond my porch lights, suddenly felt like a much greater threat. Maybe, I reasoned, having two armed men, even strange ones, check the place out wouldn't be the worst idea. It was a desperate gamble, a concession to the fear that was now a cold current running through my veins. "Relax, ma'am," Duchamp finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft, almost oily. He took a large, deliberate step forward, planting one heavy boot across my threshold, forcing me to step back, to yield the space. "We're pretty sure it'll turn out to be nothing. Maybe the caller herself offered the wrong address. We'll just take a quick look to confirm everything and move on." Blythe followed, moving with an unnerving smoothness for a man of his bulk. They didn't wait for an invitation. They simply entered, their presence immediately filling my small house, making the air feel thick and heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I flipped on every light switch I could find, desperate to banish the shadows, but the house still felt, wrong. Like a stage set for a play I desperately didn't want to be a part of. They moved quickly, efficiently, like they knew the layout of every house in the world. Straight for the second floor, their heavy boots thudding softly on the wooden stairs, a sound that resonated deep in my own bones. I stood at the bottom, watching their flashlights cut swathes through the darkness of the upper hallway, their beams probing under beds, behind curtains, even out the windows. They checked everywhere, their movements almost ritualistic, finding nothing, or at least claiming to find nothing. They descended. "All clear, and ma'am," Blythe announced, his voice flat. "Just like we thought, probably a prank call or a wrong number. You can rest easy." They didn't linger, didn't offer any further platitudes, just turned, walked out my front door, and disappeared into the night. I watched their figures dissolve into the oppressive blackness beyond the porch light, a profound sense of disquiet settling over me. The chilling wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves in the yard, reminding me to pull my worn leather jacket tighter around myself. That's when the first real alarm bell rang, clanging loud and clear in the sudden silence. I hadn't seen a police car anywhere. No flashing lights, no idling engine, no distant rumble, nothing. They'd simply walked away into nothing. I stood there for a long moment, the porch light illuminating only empty air, the street silent and dark. My unease morphed into a cold, hard knot of dread. This wasn't just weird. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The alleged emergency call itself was creepy enough. A large animal crawling upstairs, a female caller who wasn't me. But the officers, they had no car. Their uniforms were disheveled, their faces gaunt, their eyes too wide and too still. They looked less like they'd been out patrolling and more like they'd been out surviving. Fugitives in blue. Was this some elaborate middle-aged prank? Some kind of weird initiation rite for new residents? Or worse, my mind, a cynical but stubbornly rational machine, struggled to compute. I stumbled back inside, the warmth of the house doing nothing to thaw the chill in my bones. I returned to my laptop, a desperate need for answers overriding my exhaustion. I had to know if these officers were real, if this whole bizarre encounter was some elaborate, twisted joke. Maybe I needed to call the real police. Half-mindedly, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed the names Rainer Blythe, Greg Duchamp Police Department. I hit enter. My breath held tight in my chest. If this was a prank, a simple search would prove it. No digital roster, no local news mention, nothing. Except something did pop up on the very first entry. And it wasn't from a police website. It was from a blog, an obscure, dusty corner of the internet dedicated to occult phenomena, urban legends, and unsolved crimes. The title of the article, published 5 years ago, hit me like a physical blow. Where did Officer Rainer Blythe and Officer Greg Duchamp go after their last mission? Answering an emergency call regarding a malicious crawling figure on the second floor of a residence in a wooded area. Two things happened simultaneously. The knot in my stomach tightened into an agonizing coil, and I immediately began to read. My fingers, surprisingly steady, scrolled down, the words blurring, then sharpening into stark, chilling clarity. The article, written from the perspective of an amateur sleuth, detailed a case from 9 years prior. It described a female homeowner, a Lori Randall, 52, living alone at my exact address, who had called the police after hearing a large animal crawling upstairs, only to find blood trails on her staircase. Blythe and Duchamp had arrived, calmed her down, and gone inside, telling her to wait on the porch. They found the blood trail, described as human handprints rather than claw marks, leading halfway down the stairs, then turning back up toward the second-floor bathroom. The window in the bathroom was open, and the trail continued horizontally along the outside wall, as if something had crawled out and moved sideways. Bizarre, unexplainable. They went outside to investigate further, expecting to find Lori Randall on the porch, but she was gone, vanished. The article described the officers' growing alarm, their calls into the darkness, and then the cold, gooey droplets. Blood falling from above. They looked up at the porch ceiling, and then the article just stopped, abruptly. No conclusion, no resolution, just an ellipsis that spoke volumes about the fate of the officers. Anyone else would dismiss it as sensationalist garbage. Another flimsy urban legend. But not me. Not with the matching names, the matching address, the chillingly specific details of the emergency call. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the house. I was starting to believe that something had indeed been crawling in this house, that those two officers hadn't been pranksters, and that I was now caught in the echoes of a 9-year-old horror. It was late, deep into the small hours of the morning by the time I finished the article. My head swam with a nauseating cocktail of fear and exhaustion. I tried to rationalize nightmare, coincidence, overactive imagination, but the details were too precise. I forced myself to get ready for bed, promising myself I'd call the real police department in the morning, and maybe even my real estate agent. If this house had a history, I wanted out. Sleep came, grudgingly, but it was a fitful, shallow affair. It was barely an hour later when a frantic scream tore through the thin veil of slumber, yanking me violently back to consciousness. "Oh God, please send help. Oh my God, there is blood. So much blood on the stairs. I can't go back inside. Please send someone. Now!" It was a woman's voice, raw with terror. I was out of bed in a flash, bare feet slapping against the cool wood floor, a desperate surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I bolted to the window, fumbling with the latch, shoving the curtain aside. My porch light was still on, a defiant glow against the encroaching darkness. But from my vantage point, all I could see was the roof, the gnarled branches of the trees swaying like skeletal fingers in the wind. The woman's voice was lower now, closer, a panicked mumble. I strained to hear, but couldn't make out the exact words. Something about her address, I thought. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The night fell silent once more, a heavy, suffocating blanket. What the hell? My adrenaline, having spiked so high, now receded, leaving me shaky and cold. Had I imagined it? Hallucinated the scream, conjured by the article, by my own growing fear? The exhaustion was a lead weight in my limbs. I needed to sleep. I needed to believe it was just a nightmare. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, but sleep was a fickle mistress. I drifted off again, only to wake with a jolt, not to a sound, but to an absolute, bone-deep wrongness. 1 minute, I was in a restless slumber. The next, I was wide awake, shivering in my pajamas, standing on my own porch. My heart seized. Did I sleepwalk? The thought was terrifying. Alien. I felt detached, like I was moving through a lucid dream. The front door was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness drawing me in. I pushed it open, stepping back into the house, but froze, every muscle locking rigid with a horror that transcended any dream. Standing in the doorway, framed by the pale rectangle of the porch light, was a woman, or what was left of one. Her eyes were glassy, dead, staring blankly ahead. Her skin was the color of ash. Her throat, it was gone, shredded, torn away, leaving a gaping, bloody chasm. The mutilation didn't stop there. It continued down her torso, a deep, sickening canal dug from her sternum to her groin, a grotesque furrow of exposed flesh and bone, flooding the surrounding areas with congealed blood. Red droplets, thick and glistening, dripped from her fingertips onto the pristine carpet. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move. unable to breathe, my gaze fixed on the emotionless, violated face. The stillness was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart in my ears. And then, the stillness shattered. The corpse stirred, a low, wet groan, a sound of unimaginable agony, escaped from the ruined throat. Trembling, shuddering, it slowly crouched, then leaned forward, collapsing into a grotesque parody of a crawling position. It ignored me, its glassy eyes fixed on something unseen. With a sickening crunch of joints, it rigidly turned on all fours and began to crawl, slowly, deliberately, deeper into the house. It moved towards the stairs, leaving an unholy trail of glistening, dark red blood, like a worming slug from hell leaving a track of crimson mucus. Up the stairs it went, into the black maw of the second-floor hallway, and then it was gone. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my own bed, the morning sunlight spilling through the window, painting the room in a deceptively cheerful glow. My head throbbed, and my body felt like I'd been run over by a freight train. The nightmare, the woman, Lori Randall, the homeowner from the article. It had to be a dream, a vivid, terrifying nightmare, conjured from the depths of my own anxieties, inspired by the macabre story I'd read. The thought, however, brought no comfort, only a deeper sense of unease. What if it wasn't a dream? What if her tortured spirit had truly paid me a visit? What then? I showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the lingering cold of fear, then forced down some bland breakfast. My next move was clear: confirm the house's history. I called my real estate agency, my voice surprisingly steady as I inquired about the previous owners. The agent, cheerfully oblivious to my internal turmoil, informed me that the house was only 3 years old, a replacement built on the exact same location after the old one was torn down. The previous owners, a couple, had sold it happily after 2.5 years, inheriting a mansion elsewhere. Zero useful information. They claimed to know nothing about the previous house or its former owners, suggesting I contact the local police. Right, the police, the real police. I dialed the local precinct, my fingers tracing the outline of my wristwatch, a grounding habit. First, I asked about officers Blythe and Duchamp. The dispatcher, after a brief pause, confirmed their existence. Yes, they had indeed been part of the department many years ago, but when I pressed for details on their departure, a wall came up. Personnel matter, sir. We cannot disclose that information. Sir, right. My transient jobs, my general lack of engagement with people, meant I often presented as gender neutral or just invisible. It was fine. I didn't correct her. Then I recounted the previous night's bizarre visit, the emergency call I hadn't made, the 2 officers who looked like they'd clawed their way out of a shallow grave. The dispatcher's tone shifted, became more serious. The call was non-existent. She confirmed, no record of an emergency call from my address, but the fact that I'd seen those 2 specific names, describing their exact appearance. She told me she'd send someone over to investigate my naughty report. Less than an hour later, 2 new officers arrived on my porch, looking far more official and far less undead. They showed me photos of Blythe and Duchamp. Yes, those were the men. My words came out clipped, precise, an automatic defense mechanism. They then confirmed what the blog had hinted at, revealing that Blythe and Duchamp had vanished 9 years ago while answering an emergency call from this very address. The caller? Lori Randall, then 52, reporting mysterious crawling sounds. When I asked about Lori, they exchanged a glance, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes, before reluctantly adding that she too had gone missing that same night. They took my statement, left their contact information, and departed. I watched them drive off, a real police car this time, its engine humming reassuringly down the street. The severity of the situation finally, truly sank in. Blythe and Duchamp were real. Lori Randall was real. They hadn't been pranksters. They'd been Something else. Something that could impersonate the missing. Something that could haunt this very ground. The police had covered it up. I realize, not out of malice, but perhaps out of a desperate attempt to contain panic, to protect the community from a truth too horrific to bear. My search for local news reports or police files on the disappearances came up empty. They had indeed been scrubbed. I tried to reach the blogger, sending an email to the address on the dusty, unupdated contact page. I held zero expectation of a reply. The day passed in a haze of mounting anxiety, the quiet ticking of my wristwatch loud in the silence. As night fell, my fear culminated, a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I wasn't superstitious. Not truly. I was a survivor, a pragmatist. I told myself I would call the police immediately, at the slightest sign of anything amiss. At 8 p.m., all the lights in the house were blazing, every bulb fighting a losing battle against the encroaching darkness outside. I was huddled in my living room armchair, laptop open, scrolling aimlessly, pretending to be distracted. In reality, every nerve ending was tuned, acutely aware of every creak, every imagined thud, every whisper of the old house. 10 p.m. arrived, my usual shower and bedtime ritual. I stood, stretched, feigned a yawn, trying to convince myself I was just tired. But underneath the facade of normalcy, I was praying to a God I didn't believe in, praying that no crawling, gutted woman would visit me in my sleep. No grinning, dead policeman would come knocking. I shuffled towards the bottom of the stairs, my steps slowing, then stopping dead. The second-floor hallway, usually just a domestic space, now loomed over me like the cold, dark barrel of a gun. The hallway lights were off. I hadn't turned them off. I had deliberately flooded the house with light, a desperate plea for safety. Frozen, a thrumming premonition echoing in my head. I hesitated. Call the police. Some of my lights were mysteriously turned off. Please send help. Would that be a reasonable emergency call? But I had promised myself, at the slightest suspicion of danger, I would call 911. My vacillation was cut short, brutally. The menacing gun barrel of a hallway finally answered my doubt, emanating a sound I had come to associate with pure, unadulterated horror. The same wet, dragging, scraping noise the gutted woman had made in my nightmare. The sound of something large and heavy trying to maneuver on all fours. If the sound alone wasn't enough to send me spiraling into full-blown panic, the vivid, visceral images that immediately popped into my mind certainly did the trick. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a scream, a raw, primal sound that wanted to tear itself from my throat. My body suddenly flooded with a new surge of adrenaline, darted for the front door, a desperate flight instinct overriding all reason. But then I remembered Lori Randall, the two officers, the porch, the vanishing act. If whatever was crawling upstairs was following the same script, the porch wasn't safety, it was a trap. My mind cornered, desperate, wasn't thinking straight. Instead of risking the outside, I retreated, scrambling back into the living room, dropping to my knees behind the sofa. Useless cover, a child's hide-and-seek game against a monster from hell. My fingers, trembling violently, fumbled for my phone, already dialing 911. Please, something big is crawling in my second-floor hallway. I need help. Now! My voice was a choked whisper, barely audible even to myself. The dispatcher, calm and professional, offered to stay on the line. I refused. I couldn't afford the distraction. I needed to hear, to discern, to know what was happening around me. As long as the police were coming, I would be fine. I had to be. A sudden, loud creak echoed from upstairs, probably the door at the far end of the hallway. The crawling sound paused, then continued, now accompanied by a subtle clatter. The thing was entering the bathroom. Good. It was moving away from me. But if the article was to be believed, that meant it was moving outside the house. Going out was suicide. Hunching my back, I scurried, silently, on hands and knees, into the kitchen, my breath ragged in my chest. I crawled under the large counter, feeling the grit of crumbs on the floor, the cold linoleum against my cheek. This felt like better cover, more substantial. On my way, I'd snatched a large kitchen knife, the cold steel a thin comfort in my shaking hand. What now? Do I wait here? Is it truly that unsafe to leave? To make a break for my car? Floor the gas? And just go? Beads of cold perspiration trickled down my spine, chilling me further. Indecision. Again. My fatal flaw. Then, a flurry of violent, authoritative knocks on the front door, followed by a gruff, familiar male voice, tore me from my dithering. "Police! Open the door!" Relief, so potent it was almost painful, flooded through me. Thank God, they were here. Hope surged, blindingly bright. I started to crawl out from under the counter, ready to spill my guts, to tell them everything. But then, the other voice, equally familiar, equally chilling, chimed in, cutting through my fragile hope like a rusty blade. "We are Officer Blythe and Officer Duchamp. Ma'am, you already know us. Please open the door." And then, Duchamp again, his voice playful, gleeful, like a maniac at the end of a chainsaw. "Or else we're gonna have to smash it." No, 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 no. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. I bit down on my thumb, so hard I tasted blood. A desperate attempt to stay silent, to keep the sobs from escaping. Warm tears, hot and desperate, welled in my eyes, blurring the dusty underside of the counter. They were here, the wrong police, the missing police, the dead ones. My stomach dropped, not just into my gut, but through the floorboards, down to hell, and kept going. Loud thuds hammered against the front door, each one louder than the last, shaking the very foundations of the house. They were ramming it, using their bodies as battering rams. A violent explosion of splintering wood, followed by the sickening thud of a human body hitting the ground. One of them giggled, a high-pitched, childish sound. And then I heard movement, the scrape of fabric, the creak of knees as one of them got up. "Greg, can you hear that? I think Lori is still up there in the bathroom." Blythe's voice, now closer, closer than it should be. "Yeah, that dumbass bitch doesn't know how to open a window without smashing it." Duchamp, his voice dripping with amusement, more sniggers. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, began to ascend the stairs. "How about let's go help out? We'll sweep the first floor later." "Your call, boss." They were going upstairs. They had left me alone on the first floor, and the front door was shattered. It was now or never. I wouldn't make a sound. No creaking door. This was my chance. My body moved on instinct, a desperate animalistic urge for survival. I tiptoed to the ruined doorway, a sliver of cautious hope blooming in my chest. And then I sprinted. Out the door, across the porch, and towards my car, parked innocently in the driveway. Freedom, safety, Buster. But as I reached the driver's side door, my hand closing around the cold metal, my heart plummeted again. My keys, they were on my nightstand, in my bedroom, upstairs. The stupid habit, the eternal curse of my own meticulous disorganization. Going back was suicide. Time was of the essence. My mind, usually a whirlwind of anxious thought, became startlingly clear. I couldn't afford to freeze. I couldn't afford to die here, like Lori, like the last victim of this house. I veered sharply, away from the car, away from the house, and plunged into the darkened patch of woods behind my property. This was it, my only way out. This particular stretch of woods was a shortcut, a rough path to a gas station not too far away, a beacon of light and other people. 10 minutes, I told myself. 10 minutes, and I'd be safe. I'd be among humans again. I had my cell phone, its weak flashlight beam cutting a shaky cone through the oppressive darkness, but the woods swallowed me whole. There was no path, just untrodden wilderness. A thick tangle of branches and roots that grabbed at my clothes, clawed at my face. I stumbled, scraped, every few steps turning back, paranoid, straining to hear any sound of pursuit, any glimpse of their ashen faces through the trees. I'd gotten away too easily, far too easily. Was I just too scared to feel safe? Or was this a new kind of trap? The 10-minute walk stretched into an eternity, a decade-long march through a dark, suffocating tunnel, insulated from any hope, any warmth. My lungs burned, my legs ached, my throat raw from suppressed screams. Then, finally, a glimmer, the faint, distant glow of the gas station lights, a beacon of human civilization cutting through the gloom. My instincts screamed at me, urged me to unleash a primal yell, to send my voice traveling at the speed of sound towards that haven, to get at least a vicarious taste of security. It was then that the first cold, gooey droplet landed on the tip of my nose. It smelled like decaying blood. More drops followed, landing on my forehead, my cheek, clinging to my eyelashes. Before my conscious mind could process what was happening, my gaze, drawn by an ancient, terrible instinct, lifted towards the dense canopy of trees above. That's the last thing I remember from yesterday. The last moment of being Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman. Now, I lie here, not feeling pain, but a profound emptiness where pain should be. My throat, my rib cage, my stomach, they are torn open, not bleeding, but rearranged. And this hunger, this gnawing, burning, endless hunger, it is a presence, a yearning animal inside me, growing stronger by the second. And not far away, I can feel the vibrant life energy of those teenagers, delicate yet potent, threading through the shrubs and thickets like a school of fish, a lure, a promise. The time on my phone, its screen cracked and dim, says it is dusk. The light is fading fast. I have to put this down now. I have to go satiate this hunger, this primal, ancient need. I wish I could keep updating you, tell you about this new life, this terrible, insatiable transformation. But I'm afraid that very soon, the animal will take over completely, leaving behind only a tiny, flickering fragment of my human intelligence. Probably right after this first hunt, I wonder who will become the next owner of my house, and if the gang, you know who I mean, will eventually come looking for me. Character count 9873. The tang of copper and ozone clung to my tongue, thick and cloying, a taste I knew intimately, one that always presaged the kind of hell ordinary men only saw in their worst nightmares. Blood, not my own, slicked my worn leather jacket, a grotesque abstract art painted by another family's demise. The wail of sirens, growing closer, wasn't a comfort. It was the soundtrack to the end of a world, a chorus of disbelief that would soon be met with the cold, hard proof of what I just witnessed. My hands, still trembling, wanted to reach for the familiar, comforting weight of my old analog watch, but they were clenched, useless fists, sticky and warm. Plug your ears if you hear that jingle, lock your doors, and for God's sake, don't let your children near the truck. The words were a silent scream in my skull, a litany of rules carved into my very being by the last few minutes of impossible horror. But those rules, I knew, were born from the kind of knowledge that came at too high a price I just watched someone else pay in full. It had begun, as these things always did, with a deceptive whisper of normalcy, a sun-drenched afternoon that felt too perfect to be true. I'd been working the graveyard shift at the warehouse on the outskirts of Elmwood for the past month, running down some inventory discrepancies. Tonight was my last night before moving on. Another town, another forgotten job, another futile attempt to outrun the shadow that clung to me like a second skin. I was just taking a detour through a quiet, upper middle-class suburb. Looking for a shortcut back to the main highway? The air was thick with the lazy hum of summer, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious when you've seen too much. Manicured lawns, two-car garages, the gentle scent of freshly cut grass. It was a picture of suburban bliss, a scene straight out of a damn greeting card. My hand instinctively went to the cool steel of my old wristwatch, tracing the worn edges. 4:30. Time for the kids to be out playing, for the illusion of safety to be at its most potent. That's when the jingle started. Familiar, insidious. The saccharine, tinny melody of an ice cream truck, warbling from unseen speakers. It was that specific tune, the one everyone knows, ingrained in the collective subconscious of childhood. A pleasant, nostalgic sound for anyone else. But for me, it felt like a discordant note in a symphony of dread. My blood ran cold, the kind of chill that sinks past the bone and settles in the marrow. I had no idea why, not then. Just a primal, animalistic certainty that something was profoundly wrong. My grip tightened on the steering wheel of my beat-up sedan, knuckles white. Every hair on my arm stood on end. It was the same prickle I'd felt as a child. Standing on the edge of the woods behind our house, a sense of an unseen presence, a deep-seated wrongness that had always preceded, well, everything. The jingle grew louder, rounding the corner. And then I saw it, a boxy, white truck, emblazoned with the words Mr. Frosty's Ice Cream in cheerful, melting letters. It was pristine, almost unnaturally so, glowing in the afternoon sun. No rust, no dents, no peeling paint. Too perfect. Even from a distance, the vehicle looked less like something that had traversed countless streets and more like a prop, freshly pulled from a freezer box. And the jingle, it was too loud, too clear, assaulting the senses with its cloying cheerfulness. It didn't just play, it piped. A relentless, beckoning siren song that seemed to vibrate in the very air, burrowing into the soft gray matter of anyone within earshot. I watched, a morbid fascination taking hold. As a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, with a mop of blonde hair and eyes the color of a summer sky, bounced excitedly towards it. His father, a man in a polo shirt with a friendly, unassuming air, followed a few paces behind, a fond smile playing on his lips. They were a picture of innocent domesticity, the kind of scene I usually went out of my way to avoid, lest it stir up the bitter ashes of my own buried past. But now it was a tableau of impending doom, lit by the cruel, golden light of the late afternoon. My cynical brain, the one that usually told me to floor it and get out, was screaming at me. Just go. Vance, don't get involved. You know how this ends. But my other half, the reluctant conscience I cursed daily, dug its heels in. It was the same damn impulse that had kept me rooted in that dilapidated house in Sycamore Grove as a kid, when every instinct shrieked to run, to save myself. It was the same stubborn, stupid guilt that made me stop for hitchhikers, or look into the dark places I should have avoided. So, I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside my car amplifying the relentless jingle outside. I watched, my jaw tight, as the truck lumbered to a halt beside the boy, 25 feet away, maybe 30, close enough to see the details, far enough to feel utterly helpless. The father walked up, a relaxed posture, his hands in his pockets. The boy peered up at the menu board, a picture of innocent anticipation. The driver's side window was tinted, impenetrable, no glint of glass, no hint of a face within, just an inky void. And then the serving window scraped open, a sound that shouldn't have been audible from my distance, but it was, a sickening metallic shriek, like abused metal tearing on rusty rollers. The sound vibrated in my teeth, a fingernail drawn down a chalkboard, infinitely amplified. And through that newly opened gap, I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The inside of the truck was drenched in shadow, a black so profound it seemed to devour the brilliant afternoon sunlight, mocking its very existence. It was like looking into a wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world where light ceased to exist. A chill, bone-deep and absolute, bit into the air, radiating from the truck, chasing away the summer warmth. My stomach clenched. That familiar cold dread coiled in my gut. This wasn't right. This wasn't just a chill. It was the raw, unnatural cold that came before something truly awful. My mind, a cynical catalog of horrors, flashed to the things I'd glimpsed in the dark corners of the world, the whispers of entities that bled through the veil. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Run, you idiot! Run!" But I was frozen, my gaze locked on the boy, on the father, on the gaping maw of the truck. The boy, Kyle, sensing something was wrong, that preternatural sixth sense children sometimes possess, turned. His bright blue eyes, wide and innocent, fixed on his father, then on the truck, a tiny flicker of confusion playing on his face. He didn't have time to process it. One moment, he was standing there, vibrant and alive. The next, a grotesque, impossible mass of spider legs exploded from the inky darkness of the serving window. Hairy, jointed feelers, a writhing, seething tangle of nightmare, shot out, coiling around the boy. He was sucked in, not pulled, but vacuumed, like shrink wrap through a powerful industrial cleaner. A sickening whoomp of air escaped his lungs, a sound devoid of a scream, as he snapped backward like a rag doll. His head hit the top of the window frame with a wet crack, lolling unnaturally to the side. And then he was gone, swallowed by the impossible darkness within the truck. A strangled sound tore from my own throat, a voiceless wail of horror and futile rage. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, the tires spitting gravel as my sedan lurched forward. I barely registered the father's guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that would echo in my mind for weeks. My vehicle fishtailed, and I cursed, fighting the wheel. The ice cream truck, meanwhile, began to move, the cheerful jingle still mocking the horror it had just unleashed. I jammed the car into park, leaping out before it had fully stopped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My worn leather jacket flapped behind me as I sprinted, fueled by a desperate, idiotic surge of that cursed conscience. What was I going to do? I had no plan, just a suicidal need to do something. I reached the truck as it pulled away, my vision blurred with adrenaline and the sickening knowledge of what I was witnessing. I slammed my fist against the side, a dull thud against the cold metal, then grabbed the edge of the serving window, pulling myself up, peering into the impossible void that had consumed the child. The interior of the truck was a spatial anomaly, a gaping, cavernous space that defied all logic. It was not a truck, it was a portal, a vast, echoing abattoir, stretching into an unseen distance. The air inside was thick with the stench of something ancient and metallic, the coppery tang of fresh blood mingling with the cloying sweetness of stale sugar and a faint, indescribable musk of decay. My eyes, ever observant, scanned the horrific panorama. Dilapidated cattle chutes, slick with a glistening, reddish-brown residue, snaked through the darkness, leading to a sprawling plant floor textured with stained, grimy linoleum. It was a factory, a killing floor, designed with an efficient, horrifying purpose. This wasn't some forgotten relic of industry. It was a living, breathing nightmare. And the livestock? Oh God, the livestock. Hundreds of them. Children, small, pale shapes. Their movements sluggish, listless. Their faces slack and devoid of expression. Their eyes were glazed, empty, like broken dolls. They shuffled along the chutes, caked in their own filth, their small forms dwarfed by the hulking figures that moved among them. Figures in blood-stained aprons, their faces obscured by USGI cold weather masks, the kind designed for Arctic conditions. But here, they hid something far colder than ice. They moved with a chilling efficiency, wielding curved knives, opening throats with wet, tearing sounds. There were no screams. That was the worst part. The silence was absolute, broken only by the weak shuffle of small feet, the syrupy slap of blood hitting the floor, and the occasional soft thud of a lifeless body. The dead were hoisted, ankle up, onto a conveyor system that hummed softly in the oppressive darkness. Like at a dry cleaner's, they zipped off through a darkened portal, into the unknown. A hot trail of blood still sprayed from their severed necks, misting the air with a fine crimson spray. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it threatened to buckle my knees. My stomach roiled, a hot rush of vomit threatening to climb my throat. This was it. This was the source, the wellspring of the cosmic dread that had haunted me since Sycamore Grove. The same pervasive evil, operating with a cold, terrifying indifference. It was a familiar flavor of horror, but scaled up, infinitely more ravenous. This wasn't just a monster, it was an industry, a system. As the truck continued to pull away, my grip slipping, a pale, small hand reached out from the gloom. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Kyle, his head pitched at a sickening angle, his eyes dead, vacant, but still, something. A spark, a tiny flicker of recognition, buried beneath the horror. And then, he spoke. A single word, whispered in a voice I would never hear again. A voice stripped of its childish innocence, tinged with a chilling finality. Run! Then, with a sudden, impossible force, he slammed the serving window shut. Just as the gap closed, I saw the massive spider legs encircle him from behind, intertwining like grotesque fingers. They covered his mouth, his eyes, tearing him backward, deeper into the dark, sending him toward the slaughter line. The truck growled up the street, its cheerful jingle echoing, mocking. It turned the corner, the sound fading, and disappeared from view, carrying off the son of a stranger, a child I had tried and failed to save, just like I had failed my own family all those years ago. I stumbled back, landing hard on the asphalt, the sickening crunch of gravel under my spine. The father of the boy was already on his knees, a raw, primal howl tearing from his throat, a sound that mirrored the one I'd heard from my own mother so long ago. He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant, the gaze of a man whose world had just been ripped apart. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Your son was taken to a meat locker run by multi-limbed horrors? The words would stick in my throat. Useless. The next few hours were a blur of flashing blue and red lights, the guttural mumble of police radios, and the flat, unblinking stares of detectives in cheap suits. The father, a man named Michael, was inconsolable. His wife, Jessica, arriving later, her scream of anguish tearing through the quiet suburban street like a physical wound. She collapsed, wailing for her son, while their daughter, Maya, perhaps 8, clung to her mother's leg, her face a mask of bewildered terror. I stayed in the background, a silent, grim observer. They asked me what I saw. I lied, told them of Mr. Frosty's ice cream truck, exactly as it was. Took him. No spider legs, no impossible interior, no slaughterhouse. They would have locked me in a padded cell. Or worse, accused me of involvement. My word carried no credence. I knew that. My life on the road, my lack of roots, my detached demeanor, it all screamed suspect. They put out a statewide APB. They found nothing. Of course, they found nothing. The night that followed was a black void of despair. I stayed, compelled by that damn conscience, by the echoing scream of the mother. I sat in my car, parked down the street, watching their house, a silent sentinel. Michael and Jessica didn't sleep. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. Maya, the younger twin, was smart, too smart for her age. She understood the weight of the silence, the crushing grief that had descended upon their home. She had put herself to bed without fuss, a small, young, somber ghost in her pink PJ onesie. I was numb, my body cold. A sick lie, I thought, giving them any hope. I knew what I had seen. Deep down, in the furthest pit of my stomach, I knew their son, like all those children, was gone, dead. Blindly shuffled up the murder chute to those hulking things in bloody aprons. Around midnight, a small figure appeared in the doorway of their home, silhouetted against the dim light within. Maya, clutching her pink blanket, her eyes wide but not with simple fear. Something else, recognition. A chill snaked up my spine. This wasn't normal grief. This was the prelude to something I knew all too well. Michael, hollow-eyed, looked at his wife. "What?" he mumbled, barely audible. "Jessica," her voice thick with snot and tears, blew into a tissue. "Kyle's out there. We should be looking for him, trying to find that truck." She cut him an accusing glare, the blame a palpable thing between them. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't his. It was the truck's. Then Maya spoke, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that cut through the night, slicing through the remnants of false hope. "He's home, Daddy," she said. "Kyle's home." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that steals your breath, that leaves your skin clammy and your mind screaming. "No, not this, not again." My hand, trembling, went to my watch. The minute hand seemed frozen. I watched, my heart thundering as Michael and Jessica rushed to the back door. The porch light flickered on, painting the scene in a sickly yellow glow. The thing that came through their back door was not their son. It looked like Kyle. It walked like him, a shambling, mud-caked gait. But it wasn't him, not truly. Its pale skin was streaked with grime, but it was the eyes that froze me, cold and dead. Not the warm, innocent blue puddles they had been, but two icy marbles that seemed to freeze the air around them. There was a knowing, malevolent smile twisting its face, a parody of childish innocence. Jessica sobbed, wrapping the mud-streaked imitation of her son in an embrace. It didn't hug back. Those two cold eyes were pinned on Michael, then on me, a flicker of something ancient and terrible in their depths, as if acknowledging my presence, my curse. "Why'd you do it, Daddy?" The voice was Kyle's, but it was wrong. Too flat, too hollow. They led it into the living room, a family walking into a nightmare. I could feel Maya's body tense up against her mother's, a small, desperate tremor. She knew. She saw it. She knows something bad is about to happen. "What?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking with confusion. "Why'd you try to kill me? Try to kill me, huh, Daddy? Why? I thought you loved me. Dad, I thought you..." Its head reared back impossibly far on its neck, a sickening crackle of cartilage and bone. Its mouth curved into a dark, perfect O, growing wider, impossibly wide. A throaty, gurgling sound emanated from its throat. Its eyes rolled back into their sockets, showing only the whites, like a pair of blind, unseeing orbs. Jessica looked at Michael, her eyes wide with dawning horror, then back at the thing that was supposed to be her son. She started backing up, a slow, terrified shuffle. Michael, too, was frozen, his face ashen. They retreated into the living room, the Kyle thing bearing down on them, forcing them back. Maya had started to sob, clutching her pink blanket to her face, her warm, salty tears soaking her mother's shirt. The O of Kyle's mouth continued to expand, drawing further and further as it spoke again. Only this time, its lips didn't move, and the voice, deeper, warped, like the words of a demon from the mouth of the possessed, came hissing out of its throat, a wet, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. "Why, Dad? Why'd you fucking do it? You like killing little kids. Dad? Want to kill Maya? Want to see her pigtails wrapped in brain? Stop!" Michael's voice was a weak, thin rasp, lost in the echoing horror. The thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound, as Kyle's mouth continued pulling back, impossibly wide. Its lips were coated in a glistening bile, thick and viscous. Its teeth were brown and jagged, like broken splinters of ancient bone. Jessica's head snapped between the monstrosity that wore her son's face and her husband, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. Her legs hit the couch, and she crumpled onto the cushion with a surprised gasp. It was lost in the hoarse, demonic voice that had hijacked her son's mouth. "Want to bash her little head in? Hammer it until crumples and all those little girl thoughts and feelings come spilling out?" The corners of the Kyle thing's mouth tore. Rivulets of blood, dark and sluggish, sledded down its throat, staining the front of its mud-streaked shirt. Its mouth continued to pull back, like its head was splitting up on a hinge, bone and tendons snapping and crackling with sickening wet sounds. The lower half of its face was soaked in its own grotesque blood. "Make him stop, Dad," Maya moaned, her voice muffled by her blanket, a plea for a world that no longer existed. Michael couldn't speak. His voice was lost, swallowed by the terror. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively, but no sound escaped. The Kyle thing's mouth split wider, wider, the sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone sickeningly loud in the confined space. Its throat distended and undulated, like there was a knot of fingers trying to claw their way out. "Want to be a butcher, Dad?" The voice within the Kyle thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound that scraped at the raw nerves of my soul. Hack through gristle and vein and the stretch of pink flesh connecting tiny heads to tiny bodies. Feel the warm rush of blood over your hands. Feel your knife scrape bone as they drain. Its words were a poison, meant to break the man, to unravel his sanity. Want to watch the light bleed from their eyes as their life bleeds from their throat? Want to, Dad? Want to? Then, with a final horrific tearing sound, the Kyle thing's head tore back, its cheeks ripping, its mouth forced open in an awful, hellish grin, and the mass of hairy, jointed spider legs exploded from its throat, writhing and snapping into the living room, a sudden, grotesque blooming of pure horror. Jessica started to scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek of absolute terror. One of the spider legs, thick and segmented, lashed out, batting her across the face with a wet thwack. Her head snapped around, a sickening crackle echoing, and she pitched forward, landing on the couch with the boneless weight of a sack of grain. That galvanized Michael. He let out a wordless roar, galvanized by a primal, desperate surge of fatherly instinct. He flung Maya onto the couch and lurched for the rack of fireplace tools. The spider legs crackled and snapped, flickering around like a net of tendrils from the Kyle thing's broken mouth. Maya was shrieking, a raw sound of pure, childlike terror. The spider legs lunged for her, shooting forward, long and dark, aiming for her delicate, small form. Michael tore the poker free of the fire rack, a heavy, blunted piece of wrought iron. He whipped around, using his forward momentum, bringing the heavy instrument down with as much force as he could muster. A desperate, valiant swing against the impossible. Only he missed. Oh, God, how he missed. Maya, in her childlike terror, had instinctively lunged away from the spider thing trying to kill her. She had lunged right into the arc of her father's swing. The barbed end of the poker hit the center of her skull, not the monster's, and went burrowing into her brain. I heard bones snap like glass, a sickening, wet crack. I saw the poker ease into the spongy folds of her mind. She fell, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing face down with a sickening thud. A tiny, strangled sob escaped her lips. her small hand clenched into a microscopic fist against the patterned rug. And then she died. The Kyle thing began to roar with laughter, a wet, gurgling sound of triumph that was utterly inhuman. It turned on Michael, its spider legs flickering and pulsing, snapping in all directions like 10 of those inflatable dealership tube men, obscenely alive. "You like killing kids, Dad? You like—" Then, a surprised gasp. The spider legs snapped erect, like soldiers at attention, as the animation drained from the Kyle thing's face. Michael, broken by what he had just done, had wrenched the poker free of his daughter's broken mind and, with a final, desperate surge of fury, plunged it into the Kyle thing's left eye. Its ocean blue eyeball deflated, a thin run of viscous, yellow pus running down one cheek. Then the tendril sucked back into its mouth with a final, wet gurgle, and the Kyle thing pitched forward, landing on the floor with a heavy, final thud, as dead as the rest of his family. I stood there on the street, misted in their children's blood, their screams still echoing in my ears. The sight of the slaughtered children inside the truck burned into my retinas. The sirens were closer now, a banshee wail. My hands, still clenched into useless fists, began to tremble uncontrollably. This was my life. This was the curse. To witness, to be drawn in, to be tainted by the horrors that stalked the edges of reality. My own past, the Sycamore Grove incident, felt less like a distant memory and more like a fresh wound, reopened by the agony of these strangers. The ice cream truck, a beacon of childhood joy, had become another testament to the universe's indifference, to the hungry things that preyed on the innocent. I was broken. A man ruined by a summer day, by a haunting jingle, by a glimpse into a darkness I would never truly escape. I'm sure my name would be bolded in the paper, conjoined to some variation of family annihilator or witness to tragedy. But it wasn't me, not directly. I bore the blame. God, how I did. The blame of a man cursed to witness, cursed to carry the knowledge, cursed to be forever pulled towards the very horrors he tried to outrun, and then, forever alone, left to write his warnings. If your kids ask for ice cream, buy them a tub of the store-bought stuff. It's just as good. My only hope, a flimsy, desperate prayer, was that someone, somewhere, would listen and survive. Character count excluding instructions. 9,167 characters. The snap of the shutter, a quiet click, echoed in the vast, indifferent silence of the pines. My own hands, calloused and stained with something I couldn't quite identify, were clearly visible in the foreground, and behind me, swaying gently in a phantom breeze that carried no scent of pine or damp earth, were 6 figures, 6 blurred, indistinct shapes, hanging like grotesque fruit from the ancient trees. Their head, what I could make out of them, were twisted at an impossible 90-degree angle, facing the ground as if straining to hear secrets whispered by the roots. The sheer, impossible wrongness of it, the cold, undeniable horror, locked a scream in my throat. My blood didn't just run cold, it froze, splintering in my veins like shards of ancient glass. This wasn't just a photograph, this was a confession. And the photographer, the monster behind the lens, was me. I gripped the small, black digital camera, the cheap plastic suddenly feeling like a block of ice in my trembling hand. My thumb, slick with cold sweat, fumbled over the delete button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. The image, burned into the camera's tiny screen, was burned deeper still into the fragile construct of my sanity. This wasn't just a bad dream, it was a memory, twisted and ugly, that had somehow clawed its way back from a place I'd meticulously sealed off. My old analog watch, a steadying weight on my left wrist, felt alien, its ticking a mocking reminder of time I couldn't account for. I closed my eyes, trying to force the image out, but it was already there, behind my eyelids. A grisly tableau stained onto the inside of my skull. A low, guttural sound escaped me, a sound I barely recognized as my own. A sound born of pure, unadulterated terror and a sudden, sickening realization. The past was never past. It was always just waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to unspool its horrors when you least expected it. And sometimes, the most terrifying shadows were the ones you cast yourself. This wasn't some phantom hitchhiker whispering impossible truths, or a cannibal wearing a smile, or even an imposter wearing a familiar face. This was me, or at least a version of me I prayed wasn't true. It had started, as most of my misadventures did, with a desperate craving for something I told myself I didn't need. Peace, or more accurately, the absence of active, immediate threats. My life, such as it was, had devolved into a perpetual motion machine fueled by fear and paranoia. Another city, another dead-end job, another anonymous motel room that smelled faintly of despair and stale cigarettes. The cycle was a worn groove, a comfortable prison. But lately, the silence had felt heavier, the shadows longer. The memories, once neatly compartmentalized behind reinforced mental doors, had begun to leak. A fleeting scent of smoke, a flicker of something too pale in the corner of my eye. A whisper in a dead language I shouldn't understand. They were echoes of Sycamore Grove, the incident that had ripped a hole in my past and set me adrift, forever marked. I'd tried sketching, a new, tentative outlet, drawing the twisted faces, the impossible angles, the things I saw, or thought I saw, pinning them to paper as if that would somehow drain them of their power. It didn't. It just made them more real, more persistent. Even Buster, my scruffy companion, felt the edge in me. He'd look at me sometimes with those soulful eyes, a low whine in his throat, as if he knew the demons I wrestled. He was my only anchor, the one pure thing I had left, and the thought of anything happening to him was a raw, exposed nerve. So when I saw the online ad for a digital detox wilderness retreat, a phrase that usually made my teeth ache with its forced cheerfulness, something in me, that stubborn, self-destructive sliver of my reluctant conscience, twitched. Or maybe it was just pure, unadulterated exhaustion. The ad promised solitude, nature, a chance to recalibrate. I scoffed at the language, but the core idea, escape from concrete and human static, even for a week, held a perverse appeal. No phones, no internet, just the trees and the quiet. A place where the walls couldn't breathe, and no one would try to wear another man's skin. A place where I couldn't accidentally stumble upon another victim, or worse, become one. I rationalized it as a strategic retreat, a chance to lay low, to shake off the clinging tendrils of recent horrors, to remind myself that a forest, for all its potential dangers, was less complicated than people. Even the thought of being away from Buster for a few days gnawed at me, but I'd left him with a trusted contact, a gruff old mechanic who actually seemed to like dogs more than people. It was a calculated risk. A week. What could go wrong in a week of quiet? Famous last words. Leo. Always. The drive was long, the kind of long that stretched the hours thin and blurred the edges of the map. I kept an eye on the rearview mirror, a habit burned into my very being, but the familiar phantom pursuit never materialized. Just dusty highway and the occasional beat-up pickup truck. The campsite was less a site and more a designated patch of wilderness, far off any main road, tucked away in a valley choked with ancient pines. No manicured lawns or designated fire pits, just raw nature. Perfect. My worn leather jacket felt heavy as I shrugged it off, the scent of the open road clinging to it, a familiar comfort. The first few days were almost peaceful. A strange, unsettling kind of peace, like the quiet before a storm. I set up my small, olive green tent, a familiar ritual that grounded me. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I fished in a nearby stream, the rhythmic cast and retrieve of the line a meditative trance, cooked over a small campfire, the smoke biting at my eyes, the crackle of burning wood a lullaby. I saw no one, interacted with no one. This was my ideal. Solitude, anonymity, no one to disappoint, no one to accidentally put in harm's way, no one to ask me questions about a past I couldn't remember or a future I didn't want. My internal monologue, usually a swirling vortex of cynicism and self-preservation, softened, if only infinitesimally. I allowed myself a sliver of hope, a treacherous emotion I usually strangled at birth. Maybe this was it. Maybe I could outrun it. After all, maybe I could just be. I took pictures, a habit I rarely indulged. Not of myself, never of myself. Just the landscape, the way the morning mist hung in the valleys, the jagged teeth of the distant mountains against a bruised sky, the intricate patterns of moss on a fallen log, souvenirs of a temporary truce with the universe. Each click of the camera, a small, contained moment of beauty. I even felt a bizarre lightness, a sense of having shed a skin, or at least a heavy coat of existential dread. When the week was up, I packed my things methodically, every movement deliberate, almost ritualistic. My go bag was already stocked, always was. A new routine, or just a brief, welcome pause in the old one. The ride back was uneventful. The hum of the truck engine a monotonous comfort. I reached the rented room, the one I'd paid for weekly, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress a soft sigh after a week on a cot. The weight of fatigue, a welcome, normal kind of fatigue, settled over me. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, sleep came easy, undisturbed by the usual specters. Morning arrived with the insistent bleeding alarm of my phone. I groaned, stretching, my muscles protesting the abrupt return to activity. A quick shower, the hot water scalding away the last vestiges of the wilderness. Then, as a kind of self-assigned homework, I grabbed the digital camera. Time to see what visual gems I'd captured. Maybe some wallpaper from my laptop. Something to remind me of that fleeting sense of calm. I plugged the camera into the ancient USB port of my equally ancient laptop, the screen flickering to life. The first image appeared, full screen. My breath caught, not because of beauty, but because of an immediate, gut-wrenching wrongness. It was a group shot, 7 people, maybe 8, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a cluster of tents. My own olive green tent was clearly visible in the background, pristine, but there were others beside it, more tents, all looking perfectly pitched. And I was in the picture. Front and center, a wide, unnatural grin plastered across my face. But I wasn't alone. My arm was slung around a woman's waist, her body pressed close to mine, and the faces, all of them, including hers, were a horrifying blur, as if they'd violently shaken their heads at the exact moment the shutter clicked. My blood felt suddenly thin, icy. I didn't remember this, any of this. The confusion was a dull ache that quickly sharpened into a stiletto of dread. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had gone camping alone. I hadn't seen another soul, let alone a group this size, let alone posed for a picture. My hand, of its own accord, went to my wristwatch, thumb tracing the cold metal of the crown, a nervous tick, a grounding mechanism. But it wasn't helping. I zoomed in on the blurred faces, my stomach coiling. The effect wasn't motion blur. It was too perfect, too uniform, like a cheap censorship filter, only applied by something far more sinister than a software program. A flicker of memory, a cold dread that felt familiar from that encounter with Olivia and her skin-carpeted home, reminded me of things that hid their true nature. The smiling veneer, the beautiful surface, hiding something grotesque beneath. But this was my own memory being warped. My head felt light. a familiar sensation when reality began to fray at the edges. "Just a weird camera glitch," I muttered, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Or maybe I had too much of that cheap whiskey I brought, and some wanderers camped near me. Yeah, that's it. Lousy excuse. Leo. But it'll have to do. I tried to shrug it off, a forced, theatrical gesture of nonchalance. My cynical voice, usually so sharp, felt blunted, muffled by the rising tide of unease. My mind, usually a fortress of self-preservation, felt compromised. Had something finally gotten through the armor? Was this what it felt like to truly lose your mind? Not a sudden break, but a slow, insidious erosion. I scrolled through the rest of the first day's pictures. The stream where I'd fished was there, but now a blurred figure knelt beside me, casting their own line. My campfire, now surrounded by several other obscured figures. Every single picture I remembered taking of the landscape, of my solitary activities, now had these ghostly, faceless companions in them. It was as if my memories had been surgically altered. Only the camera had caught the unedited version, or perhaps the true version. This wasn't a glitch. This was a direct contradiction to my perception, to my reality. I moved to the second day's folder. The first picture was another group shot, almost identical to the first, but one of the blurred figures, the one furthest to the left, was gone. Just not there. A gaping hole in the group where a body had been. The tents in the background were still there, still pristine. A cold bead of sweat trickled down my temple. "Okay, Leo," I whispered, the sound cracking in the silent room. "This isn't drunk camping. This is something else." My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, some trick of light, some error in the camera's coding. But my gut, that ever-reliable barometer of impending doom, was screaming. The hyper-vigilance, honed over years of dodging things that defied explanation, was kicking into overdrive. Every detail felt wrong, a subtle wrongness, like a painting where a single brushstroke was out of place. But that one brushstroke spoiled the entire canvas. The way the light fell, the unnatural stillness of the figures that were there. They weren't blurred from motion. They were blurred as a state of being. I continued to scroll, a morbid fascination taking hold. Each day, another person vanished from the group shots. The process was chillingly systematic. The first to go was a man with what looked like broad shoulders, then a slighter figure, then a taller one. With each disappearance, the tents in the background seemed to change. From perfectly pitched, they began to show signs of disarray, a sagging fly, a torn guy line, a pole snapped. By the time I reached the fifth day, only two blurred figures remained in the group shot, myself and the woman whose arm was wrapped so intimately around my waist in that first photo. And the tents, they were tattered, ripped, as if a hurricane had torn through the site. All of them, that is, except for my tent, which remained resolutely, impossibly perfect, a single untouched oasis in a landscape of ruin. What in God's name? My voice was barely a whisper now. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Who were these people? Where had they gone? What kind of storm could do that to a campsite but leave one tent untouched? And why didn't I remember any of it? The questions piled on, a collapsing avalanche of dread. My memories, my perception of reality, felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. This felt worse than the creeping paranoia of the man in the walls, worse than the visceral terror of the mirror doppelganger. This was an attack on my very self, on my identity. The faint hum of my laptop was the only sound in the room. I looked down at my watch again, its hands stubbornly showing the time. It was far later than I thought. Work, my transient job, a security gig, late shift. I was hours late. My hand trembled as I unplugged the camera, shoved it haphazardly into my already packed go bag. I was still dressed in yesterday's clothes, the faint smell of pine and campfire smoke clinging to the worn leather of my jacket. No time to change. My instincts, usually screaming at me to flee, were paralyzed by the sheer, incomprehensible nature of what I'd just seen. But the office, the routine, the pretense of normalcy, it was a strange pull, a gravitational force pulling me back into the lie. I had to know. I practically sprinted to the car, the roar of the old engine, a temporary distraction from the frantic thoughts churning in my skull. The drive to the office was a blur of traffic and frantic internal debate. What did I just see? Was I hallucinating? Was this some elaborate prank? A test? My mind, usually so adept at conjuring dark theories, was blank, overwhelmed by the sheer, impossible absurdity. I burst into the sterile, fluorescent-lit office a good half hour later, disheveled. My eyes probably wide with residual horror. A few heads turned, curious glances from the handful of colleagues already there. I ignored them, my gaze fixed on the familiar, mundane landscape of cubicles and filing cabinets, desperately trying to find a foothold in the mundane. This was real. This was the present, not blurred photos and disappearing people. I made a beeline for my small, temporary desk, an island of organized chaos in a sea of corporate sameness. Before I could even drop my bag, a voice cut through the buzzing hum of the office. "Leo, Vance, right?" I turned, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. It was Mark, the assistant manager, a guy whose name I barely remembered, whose face was still a little fuzzy in my memory despite having worked here for 3 weeks. He was a portly man, balding, with a perpetually worried expression. Today, it was amplified. "Rough morning, huh?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. He was staring at my crumpled clothes, my uncombed hair, the frantic energy radiating off me. "Something like that," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Just overslept." He nodded slowly, then his brow furrowed. "We were starting to get worried. We've been trying to reach you all morning." "Oh, yeah," I mumbled, trying to sound casual. "Forgot to charge the phone." A flimsy lie, but it was all I had. Then he delivered the line that hit me with the force of a physical blow, a chilling echo of the photos I'd just seen. "Where's your wife? Leo and the rest of the team? You guys all went on that management retreat? You're the first one back." The air left my lungs in a whoosh. My wife? The rest of the management team? My mind reeled. This was a temporary gig. I was a night watchman, not management, and I didn't have a wife. I was perpetually alone, by design. This was a mistake, a terrible, terrifying mistake. My wife?" I stammered, the words feeling alien, absurd. "Mark, I don't have a wife." Mark looked at me, a strange mix of pity and confusion in his eyes. "Right, big joker. Leo. She was worried about you. Said you hadn't picked up. We told her you'd be fine. The company always sets up these team-building trips. You know, for senior staff." He gestured vaguely towards my desk. "She even sent you that picture of the whole group for your desk." My head snapped towards my desk, and there it was, nestled between a stack of invoices and an empty coffee mug, a framed photograph, a group shot, 7 smiling faces, clear as day, no blurs, no distortions. And there, in the center, was me, that same unnatural grin plastered on my face, my arms slung around the waist of the woman from the photos, her face now terrifyingly clear. And around us, the other 5 faces, the same people from the first, unedited photo on my camera, the same people who had systematically vanished from my digital reel. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. My breath hitched. I stumbled to the desk, my fingers fumbling, my eyes darting between the photo and the screen of my camera, which I'd inexplicably left on, still showing that first group shot, The one with the blurred faces, I matched them up, one by agonizing one. The tall, lanky man with the receding hairline, Mark, standing awkwardly beside him. The stern-faced woman with the sensible haircut, and the woman next to me, her smile bright, her eyes crinkling at the corners. They were all there, the same people, the same poses. But the photograph on my desk showed them vibrant, alive, their faces perfectly normal, and my memories of them were a complete, horrifying blank. They were my colleagues, my supposed management team, and the woman, the one whose arm was around my waist in the photos, the one Mark referred to as my wife. She was the head of HR, a woman I'd never seen before, whose name I suddenly knew, instinctively, as if it had been implanted directly into my brain. Sarah. A cold, visceral dread began to bloom in my stomach, spreading through my veins like poison. This wasn't just memory loss. This was something far, far worse. My past, my life, my identity. It was all being rewritten, not by a demon or a monster I could fight, but by something insidious, something that twisted reality itself. I scrolled, my thumb slick with sweat, through the photos on my camera, past the daily disappearances, past the increasingly tattered tents, past the single remaining woman, past my lone, pristine tent. I scrolled and scrolled, my gaze fixed on the small screen, a terrible certainty growing in my gut, until I reached the very last image, the final frame, the final, sickening reveal. It was me, my face, clear and sharp in the foreground, illuminated by the harsh flash, a look of profound shock, or perhaps something darker, on my features. My hands were clearly visible in the bottom corners of the frame, holding the camera, and behind me, swaying gently, grotesquely, from the dark, gnarled branches of the pine trees, were the 6 blurred figures, 6 bodies, suspended in the air, their forms indistinct, their faces, what I could glimpse through the unnatural blur, twisted, and their heads, all of them snapped at that impossible 90-degree angle. Facing the earth, broken, the world seemed to tilt. The fluorescent lights of the office buzzed, a deafening drone. The distant chatter of my colleagues faded into a meaningless hum. There was only the image, the horrific tableau, and the chilling, irrefutable truth of my own hands in the picture. I was the photographer. I had taken the picture. A cold sweat broke out on my skin, chilling me to the bone. My mind, usually so good at erecting walls, at rationalizing the impossible, was utterly shattered. I didn't remember any of it. Not the retreat, not these people, not even the woman they called my wife. And yet, the camera, my own camera, held the gruesome evidence, a silent, terrifying testimony to a week of horror I had somehow participated in, somehow orchestrated, and then neatly excised from my mind. This wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't just a monster. This was a violation of self, a complete erasure and rewriting of my own lived experience. The Sycamore Grove incident had left me with a blank where my childhood should have been. Now, it seemed, other blanks were being filled in, not with true memories, but with horrors I couldn't comprehend. My hand automatically went to the worn leather of my jacket, then to the watch on my wrist. Its ticking was a frantic drum now, counting down to, what? A final breakdown? A total loss of identity? Who was taking these pictures? I was, but who was I? And what had I done? The impulse to flee, to pack the go bag and disappear into the night, became an overwhelming, primal scream in my gut. But where would I go? If my own mind was no longer safe, if reality itself was a malleable thing in the hands of some unseen, malevolent force, then there was no sanctuary. There was only the endless road, and the terrifying knowledge that the most dangerous monster might just be the one looking back at me from the mirror, or in this case, from the lens of my own camera. The questions echoed in the suddenly silent office. Though no one else seemed to hear them, who was taking all of the pictures? And why couldn't I remember a thing? The answer, I knew with a chilling certainty, was far more terrifying than any ghost or demon I had ever encountered. It was me, or a dark, unknowable part of me that had finally, irrevocably asserted itself. Character count, 99987. My lungs burned, each breath a ragged rasp that tore at my throat, but there was no time for weakness. The cold grip of panic was a familiar, unwelcome guest, squeezing the air from my chest. Beside me, Buster, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest, pounded through the pine needles, his scruffy fur plastered with sweat and something else I didn't want to think about. The massive, wet thudding behind us echoed the frantic beat of my heart, a primal drumbeat of pursuit that promised a horrifying end. I risked a glance over my shoulder, the beam of my mag light a desperate, flickering spear against the impenetrable black. In that brief, terrifying flash, I saw it, a hulking, malformed silhouette, limbs twisted into impossible angles, its head a monstrous caricature of human suffering, its eyes, deep set and devoid of anything resembling life, reflected the meager light with an ancient, predatory hunger that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. Every fiber of my being screamed to run faster, to push Buster harder, to escape this hellish pocket of the world. This wasn't just a monster. It was the embodiment of every nightmare I'd ever fled. A fresh, raw wound torn open in the fabric of what I'd hoped was a quiet, anonymous existence. This was the culmination of days spent trying to ignore the wrongness. Days that had begun with a simple job and a desperate hope for a little peace. It had started, as it always did, with a need to disappear. Northern Minnesota, a patch of wilderness where the trees were thicker than scents and the lakes reflected nothing but empty sky. It was late spring, but the air still held a bite, promising long, cold nights even as the days stretched out. I'd picked up a gig as a kind of impromptu caretaker for a series of rental cabins, a short-term gig for a property owner who preferred to deal in cash and ask no questions. Perfect. Just the kind of temporary or low-profile work that kept my worn leather jacket from gathering too much dust in one place. Buster, my scruffy pit mix, was curled in his usual spot beside the passenger seat of my beat-up pickup, snoring softly, oblivious to the dread that always hummed beneath my skin like a faulty wire. He was my anchor, the one steady thing in a life that seemed perpetually intent on capsizing. Another slice of paradise, eh, boy? I muttered, running a hand over his warm fur. He stretched, yawned, then nudged my hand for a scratch behind the ears. Don't get used to it. Nothing gold stays. My wristwatch, an old analog piece that had seen more horrors than a combat medic, gleamed dully in the weak morning light filtering through the pines. I checked it, not for the time, but for the familiar weight of it, a small, mechanical certainty in a world that consistently offered none. The cabin I was assigned to maintain for a week was nestled deep in the woods, overlooking a sprawling, dark lake. It was exactly what I'd wanted, isolated, quiet, barely a ripple on the surface of local life. The kind of place where you could lose yourself, or at least pretend to for a little while. I'd barely unpacked my go bag, the one perpetually stuffed with essentials for a rapid departure, heavier than usual after that farm incident, and the sickening realization that even death offered no true escape when the neighbors arrived. A group of 4, their laughter echoing through the trees with an unnatural cheerfulness that grated on my nerves. They were the type who probably thought wilderness meant limited Wi-Fi. I watched them from the shadows of my porch, a cynical smirk playing on my lips. Marcus, the big, boisterous one, his voice carrying like a foghorn. Elle, chic even in flannel, with an air of city sophistication. Rachel, bubbly and overly friendly. And a fourth guy, forgotten already, probably just there to balance the numbers. I saw them as variables, potential complications in my carefully constructed solitude. My first few days were spent in a dull, predictable rhythm. Check the water heater, clear some fallen branches, pretend to be busy. Buster trotted at my heels, sniffing out every pine cone and squirrel. The lake was still, reflecting the brooding sky like a polished obsidian mirror. Too still. I'd learned to distrust stillness. It usually meant something was holding its breath, waiting, like that quiet, pristine house full of skin carpets, where the silence was a promise of unspeakable horror, or the unnerving quiet that preceded Ethan's polite smile, masking the monster within. The first genuine prickle of unease came on the second morning. I was walking Buster along a barely discernible path that hugged the lake shore, the air unusually heavy. The scent of damp earth and pine needles thickened my nostrils. Buster, usually a whirlwind of excited sniffs, was unusually subdued, his ears swiveling, a low, barely audible whine rumbling in his throat. I saw them then, two boys, probably 10 or 12, on the shared dock. One was brazenly urinating into the lake, a defiant arch against the serene surface. The other, younger, with a cruel gleam in his eye, was systematically tearing apart a bright yellow pool noodle, gleefully feeding the shredded pieces to a bewildered mallard duck. It was a petty cruelty, but it struck me wrong. Not just the act itself, but the utter lack of self-consciousness, the casual, almost primal detachment in their movements. They looked like something dredged up from the deepest parts of the woods, not kids on a family vacation. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down my spine. I gripped Buster's leash tighter. This felt off. Later that afternoon, the same two boys emerged from the deeper woods, not with fishing rods, but with rifles, bolt action, no less. They were small for such weapons, the rifles looking almost comically oversized in their hands. They moved with an unsettling purpose, their eyes flat, devoid of the childish curiosity I expected. Just empty, like the hollow spaces in the walls of that house where Mitch wasn't Mitch, where something else had taken root. That deep, instinctual paranoia began to thrum. This wasn't just typical cabin country mischief. This was something else entirely. I swore then, under my breath, that Buster wouldn't leave my side. That evening, a sickly orange sun bled through the trees, staining the lake with bruised purples and reds. Marcus, the boisterous neighbor, was attempting to coax a reluctant fire pit into submission. His friends, Elle and Rachel, had driven into town for supplies, leaving him and the other guy, still couldn't remember his name, alone. I was at my cabin, nursing a cup of lukewarm instant coffee, Buster asleep by my feet. A sudden sharp growl from Buster snapped my head up. His hackles were raised, a low, guttural rumble shaking his whole body. He was staring, not at me, but at the edge of the firelight beyond Marcus's cabin. I squinted. A figure stood there, just at the periphery of the fading light, obscured by the long shadows of the pines. It was one of the boys, the younger one, the duck killer. He was soaking wet, water dripping from his clothes and hair, catching the last of the firelight in sickly glints. His movements were wrong, jerky and slow, like a marionette with tangled strings. His head was cocked at an unnatural angle, and his eyes, even from this distance, I could feel the wrongness of them, vacant, blurry, like a lens out of focus. A phantom itch crawled on my skin, the kind I recognized from encounters with things that wore human flesh, but weren't human, like Olivia, her smile too wide, her eyes too dead. Marcus, bless his oblivious heart, called out, "Hey, kid, you all right? You look like you took a swim." He started to walk toward the boy. "Marcus, wait!" I found myself calling, a warning bell clanging in my gut. My voice was hoarse. Buster was now a rigid, trembling line beside me, his growl escalating to a furious bark. He knew. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he slowly, impossibly slowly, turned his head. His mouth was slightly agape, and a thin stream of clear, viscous drool glistened on his chin, catching the firelight. He looked hungry, not for food, for something else, something I knew intimately. Marcus, now closer, hesitated, a flicker of unease finally crossing his face. The boy then turned away, disappearing back into the deeper shadows as silently as he had appeared. Marcus, shaken but trying to brush it off, muttered something about the kid being a bit off. He then started walking toward the neighboring cabin, presumably to check on the boy or his family. "I'll just make sure he's okay," he called over his shoulder, his voice thin now. My stomach twisted. I knew Marcus wasn't coming back the same way he left. My internal clock, the one calibrated by fear, began ticking faster. Hours crawled by. The night deepened, bringing with it a profound, suffocating silence that swallowed every sound, every whisper of the wind. Elle and Rachel returned, their voices muted, their laughter gone. They had a small cooler of beers, but no Marcus. Rachel's face was pale. "We thought he was with you." "Leo. He went to check on one of the kids next door," I said, my voice flat. "The one who looked like he'd been dragged out of a swamp." The air grew colder, the scent of pine now mixed with something acrid, metallic, something I'd learned to associate with things that should not exist. The same scent that permeated that pig-stuffed mirror house. My wristwatch glowed faintly. It was well past midnight. My uneasy quiet had morphed into a full-blown internal alarm. This was it. This was the moment where my cynical, self-preservation instincts warred with that damned, stupid conscience. Every cell in my body screamed, "Run, pack the truck, disappear." But the image of Marcus, oblivious and trusting, walking into the dark, flashed in my mind. The memory of that scream, that dead man's whisper from the mountain pass, the phantom hitchhiker who'd shown me how quickly normal could rot into grotesque, echoed in my ears. I couldn't just leave. Not yet. Not while there was still a sliver of doubt. And there was Buster, his eyes fixed on me, a low, worried whine in his throat. He wouldn't let me leave. Not truly. "He should have been back by now," Elle said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I agreed, grabbing my heavy mag light. The cool, solid metal felt comforting in my hand. "Let's go. Stay behind me, and stay quiet." Buster was already at my side, a shadow. His steps were unnaturally light, his hackles still raised. He was ready. The path to the neighboring cabin was darker now, swallowed by the oppressive gloom of the forest. The air grew colder with every step, the kind of unnatural cold that sinks into your bones and freezes the blood in your veins. It smelled like stagnant water and something rotten, something like the inside of a freshly disturbed grave. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was a hungry, watchful silence, pressing in on us from all sides. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, tracing the cool metal of my watch, a tiny, grounding ritual. The cabin door was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness against the dimly lit interior. My breath hitched. This was a classic. The open door, the silence, the universal invitation to disaster. "Stay here," I muttered to Elle and Rachel, pushing them gently behind me. "Buster, stay. Guard them." I hated the words as they left my mouth. Leaving Buster was anathema, but I needed him to protect them. This place felt like a meat grinder. I pushed the door open, the wood groaning like a dying thing. The interior was a charnel house masquerading as a living room. Furniture was overturned, cushions torn, a lamp shattered. The air was thick with the stench of something foul and sweet, a cloying smell of blood and decay that made my gorge rise. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing over the wreckage. Then I saw him, Marcus. He was on the floor, sprawled awkwardly, his breathing shallow, a thin, sickly rasp. His eyes were wide open, darting aimlessly, unfocused, like a broken doll's. He was alive, but barely, and something had been in him, or through him. Before I could fully process the scene, a guttural, blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence from upstairs. Rachel stumbled down the narrow, creaking staircase, her face ashen, her eyes wide with unholy terror. There's someone upstairs," she stammered, her voice choked with horror. "She's dead! Oh God, she's dead!" A shadow, too large, too quick, detached itself from the gloom behind her. My flashlight beam swung wildly, catching it for a split second. It was the other boy, the older one. His clothes were soaked, his hair matted, and his face was a mask of primal, inhuman rage, smeared with dark, glistening blood. His teeth, too long, too sharp, were bared in a snarl that was all animal, no human. He lunged at Rachel, a horrifying, accelerating blur. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some possessed kid. This was a manifestation, a grotesque inversion of humanity. Then, a black blur, a streak of pure, unadulterated fury. Buster! He launched himself past me, a ferocious growl tearing from his throat, slamming into the boy with the force of a battering ram. The impact threw the boy against the wall, a sickening thud. Buster was on him instantly, a tornado of teeth and claws, his snarls drowning out the boy's inhuman shrieks. This wasn't the playful Buster. This was a protector, a beast unleashed against an abomination. "Run!" I roared, grabbing Rachel's arm, pulling her toward the open door. Elle, frozen in terror, seemed rooted to the spot. "Elle! Now!" The escalating chaos, the sounds of tearing flesh. Buster's savage growls finally broke her paralysis. She bolted after us, her feet clumsy on the slippery floor. We burst out into the brutal, unforgiving darkness of the forest. The screams from the cabin, now joined by an unearthly, high-pitched wail, echoed behind us, chasing us through the trees. The familiar scent of pine was now overlaid with the metallic tang of fear and a horrifying, undeniable scent of fresh blood. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a desperate drum. My mind was screaming, "Go! Go! Leave it all behind!" But Buster was still in there. My protector. My only constant. He was fighting for me. He was fighting for Sykes. "Buster!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, tearing at my throat. "Buster! Come on, boy!" I pulled Rachel toward the pickup, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat and something else that I prayed was just mud. Elle was already scrambling into the back seat, sobbing uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, a blessed sound. I threw it into reverse, the tires spitting gravel. I scanned the darkness, desperate for a glimpse of his black fur, for the sound of his triumphant bark. Nothing, only the growing, guttural snarls from the cabin and the sickening sounds of something being torn apart. My heart sank, a lead weight dragging me into despair. "We have to go, Leo!" Rachel shrieked, her voice raw with terror. "Please, they're coming!" The sounds of pursuit were closer now, heavy, sloshing footsteps coming from the cabin. Not just the boy, but something bigger, something that shook the very ground. I squeezed my eyes shut for a microsecond, the image of Buster, brave and fierce, flashing behind my eyelids. He was my conscience, my fatal flaw. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't. But the others, I had to get them out. I had to make the choice, the one I always resented. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tears blurring my vision. The truck lurched forward, leaving the horrific symphony of screams and snarls behind, a black hole of pure, concentrated evil. The scream from the bus, the phantom hitchhiker's impossible whisper, the desperate, dying gurgle of Ethan. They all coalesced into this one agonizing moment of leaving something I loved behind. This was the true terror, the one that broke you from the inside out. The drive was a blur of frantic thoughts and choked sobs, more Rachel's than mine, but the grief was a raw, gaping wound in my chest. I drove for hours, pushing the old truck to its limit, putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. We found a grimy motel in a town that probably didn't even have a gas station, just a single, flickering neon sign. I dropped Elle and Rachel off, handed them enough cash to get them on a bus, and told them to forget they ever saw me. They were too traumatized to argue. They just stumbled into the motel, shells of the people they were. But I couldn't leave it at that. The image of Buster, still fighting, still loyal, was a burning brand in my mind. He was my family. He was all I had left. The thought of him being lost, or worse, consumed by that thing, was unbearable. It clawed at me. The guilt, the desperation, the profound sense of wrongness. My hand went to my watch, fiddling with the crown, trying to ground myself. This wasn't about heroism. This was about a profound, almost pathological responsibility that I cursed even as it drove me. I couldn't just walk away. My reluctant conscience, my most dangerous trait, demanded I return. I waited until the early hours of dawn, the sky a bruised purple, before heading back. The air was colder, crisper, promising a brutal day. My go bag was still in the truck, but I pulled out the heavy maglite and a wrench, the only weapons I had. My hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the fear that tasted like ash in my mouth. Every curve of the road, every looming shadow of the pines, screamed danger. This was a fool's errand. I knew it. But the thought of Buster, alone, perhaps injured, propelled me forward, a desperate, unwavering beacon in the darkness. The cabin was a ghost of its former self. The door still hung open, a gaping maw. The stench was worse now, cloying and thick. A mix of blood, decay, and something else. A musky, animalistic odor that curdled my stomach. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of something from the ceiling. I stepped inside, my breath held, my flashlight beam sweeping the devastation. It was worse than I remembered. Blood smeared the walls in gruesome patterns. Furniture was splintered, and the floor was slick with fluids. It was a slaughterhouse. My eyes darted around, searching for a familiar black shape, a sign of life. Anything. My heart was a stone in my chest. "Buster?" I whispered, my voice a broken rasp. "Buster? Boy?" No answer, just the drip, 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 and the buzzing of flies already at work. My chest tightened, the grief overwhelming. He was gone. My one pure thing, gone. Swallowed by the darkness that always seemed to follow me. The same darkness that haunted me from Sycamore Grove. The same darkness that tainted every road I'd traveled. Then, a rustle, a faint, weak whimper from the deck outside. Adrenaline surged through me, a raw, burning hope. I stumbled through the debris, pushed through the broken door to the back deck, my flashlight beam shaking, and there he was, Buster. He was standing, barely, his black fur matted with grime, mud, and sticky, dark blood. A deep, ragged gash ran down his flank, and his eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were glassy, unfocused. He looked up at me, whimpered again, and then, slowly, agonizingly, his tail gave a weak, single wag. He pushed himself forward, staggering toward me, a testament to his unbreakable spirit. "Buster!" I choked, dropping the flashlight and wrench, falling to my knees. He collapsed into my arms, a heavy, trembling weight. I buried my face in his fur, tears finally streaming down my face, hot and salty against his matted coat. He was alive. He was actually alive. The relief was a tidal wave, washing over me, leaving me weak and trembling. But the relief was fleeting. A sudden, deep guttural growl vibrated through the deck. Not Buster's. My head snapped up, my eyes wide with terror. The flashlight, dropped on the ground, lay at an awkward angle, its beam pointing toward the shadows at the edge of the deck. Something massive moved there, a shift in the absolute blackness that seemed to suck the light out of the air. A grotesque silhouette, its limbs twisted into impossible configurations, its body a misshapen mass of muscle and bone. The eyes, hollow and ancient, caught the faint spill of light from the cabin, burning with malevolent intelligence. It was the thing that had caused all this, the true monster. It filled the space, its presence suffocating, the air growing heavy and cold. It took a step forward, its heavy, squelching footsteps sounding like something dragging itself from the bottom of a bog. The guttural growls resonated in my chest, a primal threat that promised a slow, agonizing end. This was more direct, more personal than the wall dweller, more predatory than Ethan. It felt like it was hunting me. Specifically, my mind screamed, "Run, now." This time, there was no conscience to fight, only instinct, pure, unadulterated terror. I scooped Buster into my arms, ignoring the pain in his side, ignoring the weakness in my own limbs. He was heavy, but I held him tight, an iron grip. My eyes darted to the truck. It was a straight shot. "We're going, boy," I whispered, my voice thick with fear and determination. "We're going." I bolted, barely. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, my back screaming for me to look behind. The heavy, squelching footsteps pounded behind us, faster than they should have been for such a hulking mass. The creature's roar ripped through the dawn, a sound of pure, unholy rage that vibrated through the very trees, shaking the leaves, tearing at the silence of the woods. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my miserable life. I reached the truck, fumbled with the door, threw Buster onto the passenger seat, ignoring his pained whimper. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and twisted the key. The engine turned over. Thankfully, a sputter, then a roar. I threw it into drive and floored it. The truck lurched forward, spitting gravel, just as something heavy slammed against the back bumper, rattling the whole frame. Another roar, closer this time, and then a sickening shriek of tearing metal. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just drove, faster than was safe, weaving through the winding dirt roads, putting as much distance as I could between us in that place. The police, of course, found the carnage, a family mauled, a cabin destroyed, and they found bite marks on the boy, on Marcus, and they saw Buster's fresh wound, the matted blood on his fur. They blamed the dog, my dog. They called him dangerous. They wanted to take him. My blood ran cold, a familiar, furious rage burning within me. The same rage I felt when people dismissed what I saw, when they tried to rationalize the impossible. "It wasn't him," I told the sheriff, my voice tight with barely contained fury. "It was something else, something not human." He looked at me, his eyes full of pity and suspicion. "Son, we got clear evidence. Dog attack, pit lab mix, aggressive. We're going to have to put him down." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Put him down, my Buster. The one thing that kept me tethered to sanity. The one pure, unwavering light in my life. The universe, always hostile, always trying to strip me of everything. The memories of that farm flashed in my mind. The cosmic indifference, the harvesting of souls. No, not Buster, not ever. I didn't argue. I just left. While the sheriff was distracted with the crime scene tape, while the other deputies were canvassing the remaining cabins. I slipped Buster into the truck, drove away, and didn't look back. He needed medical attention. But I knew no vet would treat a dangerous dog without questions, without calling animal control. So I found a small, discreet clinic hours away, paid cash, and spun a story about a hunting accident. They stitched him up, gave him antibiotics, no questions asked, or at least none they voiced. Now we're back on the road. Buster, still a little weak, is curled beside me, his steady breathing a constant comfort, a proof of life. But the weight of it all presses down, heavier than ever. I'm a fugitive now, wanted for something my dog supposedly did, fleeing from something no one will ever believe. The shadows of that lake, of that monstrous thing, still cling to me, seeping into my dreams, twisting every quiet moment. Every time I close my eyes, I see its hollow, ancient eyes, hear its guttural roar, feel its breath on my neck, the stench of that cabin, the taste of blood in the air, the feel of Buster's trembling body in my arms. It's all burned into me. This life, this endless cycle of horror and flight, it feels like a curse, a debt I can never repay. The phantom hitchhiker, Ethan, Olivia, Mitch, the pig creature, the farm in the afterlife. They are all chapters in a book that refuses to end, and each chapter makes the next one heavier, more impossible to bear. And now, I have Buster, my Achilles heel, my reason to keep going, my reason to keep running, because if they ever catch us, they'll take him. And that, I realized, driving through the silent, indifferent night would be the true end of me. The woods whispered my name, daring me to return. But I know better now. I know the truth. And the truth is, the monsters are always out there. And sometimes they wear the faces of children. And sometimes they're closer than you think. And sometimes the very act of surviving feels like the biggest punishment of all. Character count 9,876. The shattered glass exploded against something that wasn't skin, wasn't bone, not in any way I understood it. A sound, raw and primal, ripped through the air. Something less like a scream and more like the tearing of metal. A visceral agony that scraped against the inside of my skull. It bought me precious seconds, enough time to scramble, to hurl my body towards the window, the sharp kiss of jagged shards tearing at my skin as I burst through, desperate for anything but the stale, rotting breath of what had once warmed my father's face. The night air hit me, cold and mercifully clean, but the scent of decay, of something profoundly wrong, clung to me, a phantom limb of horror. I ran blindly, the frantic thud of my own heart in my ears, the impossible sound of cracking joints and wet, tearing flesh echoing in the mausoleum of my memory, the only compass in a world that had just unraveled into a nightmare. That moment, a primal, desperate flight from an unimaginable horror, was the culmination of a day that began with an unsettling stillness, a quiet dread that seeped into the very bones of our house, hinting at the abyss that lay just beneath the veneer of ordinary life. It was 20 years ago, but the memory, sharp and unyielding, still dictates the rhythm of my breath, the twitch of my hand towards the worn leather of my jacket, the constant, low hum of paranoia that has become the soundtrack to my existence. The morning had dawned not with the usual optimistic stretch of light, but with a muted, bruised glow, as if the sun itself was hesitant to fully commit to the day. I was maybe 8 or 9, small enough that my legs swung freely beneath the kitchen table, but old enough to feel the cold, metallic tang in the air, a scent like ozone mixed with something acrid and sweet, a smell I'd come to associate with things that defy the natural order. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest, a physical weight that made it hard to draw a full breath. The usual symphony of chirping birds outside our suburban window was conspicuously absent, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum, sucking all the normal sounds out of the world. Even the soft, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator, a comforting background noise on any other morning, now seemed unnervingly loud. A single mechanical pulse in a world gone mute. Every tick of the kitchen clock, typically ignored, grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard, each second stretching into an eternity, a slow, torturous countdown. Then he walked in. Dad, my old man, the anchor in a world that already felt wobbly on its axis. He was a big guy, broad-shouldered, a mechanic whose hands were permanently ingrained with grease and calluses. A man whose presence usually filled a room with a kind of sturdy, reassuring warmth. But not that morning. Not then. "Morning, kiddo," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper, drained of its usual booming vitality. It was as if some unseen dread had leached the very essence from him, leaving only an echo. The words hung in the air, heavy with a foreboding that sent a primal shiver, like ice water, slithering down my spine. I watched him move, an unnatural sluggishness in his usually robust stride, as he poured coffee into his favorite chipped blue ceramic mug. The steam, usually a comforting plume, curled upward like ghostly tendrils, dissolving into the heavy air. His face was pale, almost ashen, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, shadows clinging to them as if he hadn't slept in days, or perhaps had seen something in his dreams that refused to release its grip. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated, as though he carried an invisible burden too heavy for even his strong frame. He sat across from me, not looking at me, but staring blankly through the window at the backyard, his gaze unfocused, distant. The sunlight outside, which should have been bright, seemed muted, hazy, as if the very day had lost its vibrancy, its definition, its will to be. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, my voice small, thin, barely cutting through the oppressive silence that now felt like a living thing, a suffocating blanket woven from unease. I watched his eyes snap back to me, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I saw something flicker there, a raw, exposed fear, a desperate plea, a recognition of something profound and terrible. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually tell me, that he might unload the invisible weight crushing him, allow me to share even a slee fraction of it. But then the moment passed, a shutter slamming down behind his eyes, and his expression hardened, solidifying into the familiar mask of stoicism he wore when things were difficult. "I'm fine. Eat your breakfast," he replied, his voice clipped, distant, an abrupt dismissal that stung like a slap. A surge of frustration warred with a cold, creeping fear in my gut. Part of me, the part that still believed in simple answers, wanted to press him, to demand to know what was going on, to break through his uncharacteristic reserve. But another, more ancient part, the one that instinctively recognized danger, whispered that doing so might unravel something I wasn't ready to face, something that might swallow us both whole. I clenched my fists under the table, my knuckles white, forcing the questions back down my throat, forcing myself to stay silent. The crunching of my cereal in the otherwise silent room sounded deafening, a monstrous noise in the quiet. The tension between us, thick and suffocating, stretched like a taut string, vibrating with an unspoken threat, ready to snap at any moment. Even the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall seemed slower now, each second dragging on with a deliberate, agonizing weight that set my teeth on edge. I picked at my food, the taste like ash in my mouth, the memory of his distant gaze chilling me far more than the cold air that permeated the house. I kept glancing at him, a nervous tick I'd carry into adulthood, a constant scanning for the wrongness in a situation, the subtle shift in a person's demeanor that signals the approach of something truly awful. Night descended, pulling a curtain of inky blackness over the already bruised day. I was drifting in that half-sleep state, somewhere between dreaming and waking, when a soft, almost imperceptible creak of the door roused me. My heart gave a startled thud, then began to pound, a frantic drum beat against my ribs. I sat up slowly, my breath catching in my throat, the shadows in my room seeming to deepen, to coil and shift, taking on monstrous, menacing forms in the dimness. My blood ran cold, a glacial current through my veins, when I saw the silhouette sitting at the edge of my bed. It was Dad, illuminated by the dim, flickering glow of the hallway light spilling through the cracked door. But he looked smaller, diminished somehow, his broad shoulders hunched, his head bowed as if under an unbearable, invisible burden. My analog wristwatch sat on my bedside table, its hands stuck at some forgotten time. But even then, I felt the phantom weight of it on my wrist, a nervous habit forming, a constant check on a time that always seemed to be running out. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I managed to whisper, my voice a shaky, reedy thing, barely audible above the frantic pulse in my ears. Confusion and a creeping sense of dread tightened their grip around my throat. My mind, young and unequipped for such things, raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. The shadows in the room seemed to press in closer, amplifying the unnatural stillness that had settled over everything. A silence so profound, it was no longer merely the absence of sound, but a malevolent presence. In his hands, I saw the dull gleam of metal, his gun, the one he kept locked in the safe, used only for hunting deer. Never brought inside the house like this. His fingers, usually so steady, were trembling slightly, a tremor that seemed to vibrate through the very air. His face was cast down, shrouded in shadows, but even in the dimness, the raw, aching sorrow etched into his features was unmistakable. The sight of him like that, broken and vulnerable, was jarring, a stark, painful contrast to the unshakable, unwavering man I had always known, the man who had always been my protector. "You know I love you, right?" he said softly, his voice cracking, each word laced with an ominous, chilling finality that made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat. The vulnerability in his tone wasn't reassuring. It felt like a farewell, a goodbye cloaked in dread, sending a fresh shiver down my spine and planting a seed of pure terror deep within me. It felt like a confession, a penance. Chills ran through me, a freezing wave from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. We weren't the kind of family to say things like that, not aloud. Love was understood, unspoken, a silent covenant. To voice it now felt like a desperate, last-ditch effort, a preparation for an ending. "Yeah, Anir, I know," I replied, my voice catching in my throat, thin and reedy, as an inexplicable unease tightened its grip on me. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, as if something unseen, something vast and malevolent, was closing in, pressing the very oxygen from the space. My pulse quickened, a frantic bird trapped in my chest, the silence between us stretching into an unbearable void, filled only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath him, a sound that suddenly seemed monstrously loud. Then, a loud thud. It came from the living room, a jarring, sickening sound that shattered the fragile, dreadful moment. I flinched violently, my pulse skyrocketing, my body tensing, ready to spring. Dad's head snapped up, his movements quick, jerky, entirely unlike his normal self. His grip on the gun tightened until his knuckles turned white, stark against the dark metal. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jump in his cheek, and his eyes, wide and wild, darted towards the door as if expecting something to burst through it, to tear it from its hinges at any moment. "I should have known it had come back," he muttered, his voice low, guttural, filled with a bottomless dread that turned my blood to ice. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the shadows, to the unknown. What are you talking about?" I asked, a thin thread of panic weaving its way into my voice, which trembled uncontrollably. The room, already cold, seemed to drop another 10 degrees, the air growing frigid, biting. He knelt down suddenly, his movements stiff, almost mechanical, His large hand gripped my shoulder firmly, his fingers digging into my flesh. An echo of a warning from a past I couldn't yet recall. His dark eyes, usually warm and comforting, now locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten, a burning desperation that bordered on madness. "Promise me you'll stay in this room until you hear the front door open," he demanded, his voice shaking but resolute, carrying an ominous weight that made the room feel colder still, the air thick with unspoken threats. His words felt less like a request and more like a desperate, final command, a desperate plea from someone who already knew the unspeakable horrors that lurked just beyond the threshold, out of sight but not out of mind. "Why? What's out there?" I whispered, my stomach twisting in knots, a sickening coil of fear beginning to claw its way up my throat, choking me. "Promise me," he said again, his voice cracking, rising in intensity with each word, a raw, ragged sound of desperation. His grip on my shoulder tightened painfully, his nails digging in, leaving imprints I'd feel for days. His eyes, burning with a wild, haunted desperation, were wide, gleaming in the gloom, reflecting some unseen terror. It felt like he was fighting, physically fighting, to hold himself together, his words trembling with the colossal weight of an unspoken, unimaginable terror that loomed just beyond my young comprehension. He was saying goodbye, I realized even then, instinctively. He was giving me his last command, reluctantly, my mind numb with fear. I nodded. I was too overwhelmed, too terrified to argue, to do anything but obey. He stood, his movements slow, deliberate, each action a conscious effort, as if steeling himself for an unbearable ordeal, for what lay ahead. He leaned down, a gesture so uncharacteristic, so utterly out of place for my gruff father, and pressed a kiss to my forehead. His lips were cold, clammy, and the touch only deepened my unease. A final, chilling confirmation that this was no ordinary night. Without another word, without a backward glance, he turned and walked toward the door, his silhouette disappearing into the dimly lit hallway, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that now seemed to bleed from the very walls. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice flat, heavy with a chilling finality that echoed in the sudden, profound silence he left behind. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Sitting in the absolute dark, my body trembled uncontrollably, a fine tremor that shook me to my bones. Muffled crashes and guttural, inhuman roars echoed through the house, each sound sending a fresh jolt of terror through me, setting my teeth on edge. My imagination, vivid and cruel, conjured horrifying images beyond the thin wooden door, monstrous claws raking against the walls, leaving deep, jagged scars in the plaster, tearing through the very fabric of our home. In my mind's eye, shadowy figures with glowing, malevolent eyes lingered just beyond the threshold, their guttural growls vibrating through the silence, rattling the very foundations of the house. The sounds intensified, becoming more frantic, more violent, the distinct cracking of breaking furniture, the sickening, never wet thud of something heavy hitting the floor. Then came a sound that would forever be seared into my memory, a wet, sickening tear, a ripping sound that could only be flesh, followed by an unnerving, absolute silence that seemed to stretch on forever, a vast, empty void where noise should have been. My hands gripped the blanket tightly, my knuckles white, my whole body rigid with fear as I tried to steady my ragged, gasping breathing. The stench, that metallic, acrid smell, was growing stronger, seeping under the door, filling my small room. Moments later, or perhaps an eternity, time had ceased to have meaning. The handle of my bedroom door slowly, agonizingly, began to turn. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. The door creaked open with an agonizing slowness, revealing a silhouette illuminated by the faint hallway light, a figure dark and undefined against the bruised glow. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. like it was trying to escape my chest. Was it Dad? Had he won? Had he made it? Hope, thin and fragile, flickered for a fraction of a second, quickly extinguished by the cold dread that remained. A car's headlights, passing on the street outside, briefly lit the room through the gap in the curtains, painting the walls with fleeting, ghostly light. Relief, potent and intoxicating, washed over me as I saw the familiar, dark blue of his uniform, the outline of his broad shoulders, until the figure dropped to all four with an unnatural, jerky, almost insectoid movement, and crawled into the corner of the room, as if trying to hide from the fleeting light. My chest tightened, a cold, hard knot of terror. Realization dawned, brutal and unforgiving. This wasn't my dad. This was something else, something that wore his skin like a disguise. Shaking so violently I thought my teeth might shatter. I reached for the bedside lamp, my hand fumbling blindly in the dark. My fingers, numb with cold, finally closed around the cord, and with a desperate tug, the room was suddenly bathed in harsh, orange light. The air, already frigid, felt colder, sharper, as if the room itself had become hostile, a willing participant in the horror. The thing wore my dad's face like a grotesque, ill-fitting mask, stretched and distorted. Blood, dark and glistening, dripped down its neck in thick, viscous rivulets, staining the familiar blue fabric of his uniform. Its eyes, the windows to a soul that was no longer there, were hollow, sunken, inhuman, and glinted with a sickly, malevolent yellow hue that seemed to pierce straight through me. Seeing not a child, but prey, it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that made its neck crack with a sound like dry branches snapping, studying me with a grotesque, unsettling curiosity, as if amused by my absolute terror, by the fragile, pathetic life trembling before it. It stood, slowly, its bones cracking and popping with wet, tearing sounds that defied all natural anatomy, sounds that curdled the blood in my veins. It lumbered closer, each step heavy, dragging, yet unnervingly swift. My instincts screamed at me to run, to scramble, to do anything but sit there, frozen and helpless. But my body betrayed me, locked in a paralysis of pure, unadulterated fear. Frozen in place, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator. I watched as it leaned in, its breath washing over me, reeking of decay, of something ancient and rotten, a smell like wet earth and spoiled meat. The sound of its shallow, wheezing breaths filled the small room, each exhale chilling me to the core, a cold, rasping whisper of death. Somehow, from somewhere deep inside, a tiny, desperate spark ignited. Perhaps it was that nascent, inconvenient conscience, the one that would plague me for decades, pulling me into dangers I should have avoided. Or perhaps it was just the sheer, animalistic terror. I found the strength to move. My hand, without conscious thought, grabbed the bedside lamp. With a raw, guttural cry that sounded alien even to my own ears, I swung it with all my might, a desperate, clumsy arc. The bulb shattered against its head with a dull crunch, spraying glass shards and sparking light. The creature let out another guttural screech, a sound so piercing, so utterly alien and devoid of anything human, that it made my ears ring, made my teeth ache. The momentary shock, the raw sound, was all I needed. I bolted, scrambling over the bed, kicking the blankets aside, throwing my small body towards the open window. The only escape, shards of glass, sharp and merciless, tore at my skin as I launched myself through the opening, desperate, and fell onto the dew-wet grass, running blindly into the shroud of the night. The forest swallowed me whole, a maw of deep, suffocating darkness. The trees, ancient and gnarled, twisted into grotesque shapes, their shadows seeming to shift and move with malevolent intent, morphing into forms that were almost human, almost recognizable, dissolving into the deeper gloom whenever I tried to focus, to truly see. Some seemed to slither like serpents through the undergrowth, their unseen bodies rustling in the dry leaves, while others lumbered with an eerie, stilted gait, just out of reach of my peripheral vision. Always there, always watching. Whisper, dry and brittle as dead leaves, carried on the wind, their words unintelligible but filled with a chilling malice that prickled the hairs on my neck. Twigs snapped underfoot as I pushed through the dense brush, the adrenaline in my veins, a burning fire, drowning out the searing pain in my limbs, the cuts on my skin, the terror in my heart. The wind howled through the branches, a mournful lament, carrying faint, distorted echoes of that horrific screech, a sound that would haunt my dreams for decades. When I finally burst out of the tree line, collapsing onto the hard shoulder of the highway, headlights, blinding and disorienting, washed over me. I crumpled, my vision fading, the faint, cloying scent of blood and pine needles lingering in the cold night air as I lost consciousness. It was the first time I ran. It would not be the last. I woke to the sterile, unforgiving brightness of a hospital room, surrounded by antiseptic white walls that felt suffocating in their cleanliness. The sheriff, a large, grim man whose face was etched with a weariness I'd soon understand, sat beside me, a notepad clutched in his beefy hand. He asked questions I couldn't answer, each one more pointed, more insistent than the last. They had found the house, not just damaged, ruined. Claw marks, impossibly deep and jagged, were etched into the walls, gouged into the very foundations. And the sight of those marks, physical proof of an impossible violence, was enough to silence any doubts they might have had about my frantic, unbelievable story. "We'll find out what happened to your dad, son," the sheriff said somberly, his voice devoid of conviction, a hollow promise that echoed the vast, empty space in my chest. His eyes, though trying to convey reassurance, betrayed a hint of something else, a deep, ancient fear, as if he, too, knew there were things in this world that couldn't be explained, couldn't be caught, couldn't be stopped. But they never did. They never found anything. 20 years later, I've built a life of sorts, a transient one, filled with late-night shifts in cheap motel rooms, always moving, always just a step ahead of the past. The worn leather jacket is a second skin, a tangible piece of every horror I've seen, and the old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick now, is my constant companion. I'm an ordinary man, or what's left of one, to whom extraordinary and terrible things just keep happening. My latest gig, a night security detail in some godforsaken industrial park, offered anonymity and a semblance of peace, a quiet desperation that suits me. But tonight, as I glance out the grimy window of the guard shack, a cold, familiar dread washes over me, chilling me to the bone, a sensation as distinct as the metallic tang I still occasionally smell when the air is still. Under the flickering, erratic streetlight, a figure stands. It's too far away for details, but its shadow stretches unnaturally long across the desolate pavement, a distorted, murky, mocking caricature of a human form. The dim, uneven light casts an eerie glow, highlighting the edges of its hoodie, leaving its face obscured in profound darkness, a void where features should be. The air around it seems to ripple, heavy with that strange, oppressive energy, as if the very night itself is holding its breath, waiting. Its posture is familiar, sickeningly so, a subtle shift in the way it stands, a resonance with something deep and buried in my oldest nightmares. It wears a hoodie, a common enough garment, but as it slowly, deliberately looks up, the faint, sickly yellow glint in its hollow, inhuman eyes, even from this distance, tells me everything I need to know. It's back, and this time, it's not looking for my father, Character count, 9,976 characters. My lungs burned, a raw, screaming fire in my chest that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with pure, unadulterated terror. The old leather jacket I wore felt like a lead blanket, soaked through with sweat that wasn't from a summer sprint, but from the icy dread that had clamped onto my spine. Behind me, the apartment door groaned on its hinges, a sound like a dying animal, and I knew what was coming next. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, guttural snarl, a sound that would forever be seared into my brain, louder and more monstrous than anything a human throat should be able to produce. My hand, slick with something I didn't want to think about, instinctively went to my wrist, my thumb tracing the worn metal of my analog watch. No time, never enough time, just the sickening throb of my heart against my ribs, each beat a drum of impending doom. I knew this feeling, the gut-wrenching certainty that the world had spun off its axis, plunging me headfirst into another nightmare. My legs were moving, mechanical and unthinking, carrying me away from the chaos I'd just unleashed, away from harmony, or rather, away from whatever harmony had become. This wasn't the first time I'd run, and if my luck held, it wouldn't be the last. But this time felt different, more personal, more inevitable. It felt like running from a piece of myself. The storm inside me had been brewing for months, long before the raw meat and the guttural snarls. It had started with the breakup, an act that was anything but liberating. Despite what the self-help gurus might preach, I'd be lying if I said ending things with harmony felt like freedom. Instead, it was a volatile mix of guilt and relief, clashing in a violent whirlpool that threatened to drag me under. Had I done enough? Was leaving her selfish? Or was it the only way to preserve what little sanity I had left? Her tears, those pleading words that echoed like tiny, sharp knives in my head, and my own crushing sense of failure. They clung to me like a shroud. Every moment afterward felt like dragging chains through a dense, suffocating fog. It was the kind of agonizing decision that felt like putting a puppy down behind a woodshed, a helpless, soul-crushing act that you knew, with a morbid certainty, had to be done. Harmony didn't need a boyfriend. She needed therapy. Or perhaps, I realize now, an exorcism. My bad luck, as always, chose the latter for her. We'd met in our 20s, a chance encounter that felt like fate at the time, though now I recognized it as another thread in the tapestry of my cursed existence. She was beautiful in a fragile, haunted way, big, dark eyes that seemed to hold a universe of unspoken sadness, a wisp of a smile that rarely reached them. Her past, a broken record she played often, was a litany of abandonment. Mother overdosed, father vanished. She'd bounced through foster care, a leaf adrift, clinging to anyone who offered the barest semblance of stability. And when she clung, she did so with a desperation that was both heartbreaking and utterly suffocating. My phone, a cheap, indestructible burner I used for my transient jobs, became a vibrating extension of her anxiety. Hundreds of texts would pile up in a single day, each one a desperate plea for reassurance. "You're not mad, right? You're not leaving." If I didn't respond with the speed of a seasoned hostage negotiator, she'd spiral. The phone would ring incessantly, her voice frantic, tearful, barely coherent. "Why are you ignoring me?" she'd cry, the sound a dull ache in my chest, stabbing at whatever resolve I tried to muster. Each confrontation, each attempt to reason with her, left me drained, a mix of guilt and helpless frustration tightening in my chest. The cycle would repeat endlessly until I felt like a dry sponge, wrung out and brittle. Her texts, her insatiable need for constant validation, her melodramatic meltdowns whenever I so much as glanced at someone else, it wore me down, eroded me piece by piece. But I stayed, a fool playing hero, convinced I could save her. I should have known better. My past taught me that I can barely save myself, let alone anyone else. It's a cruel joke, my reluctant conscience always dragging me into the fire, like that poor hitchhiker screaming into the snow-choked night, or the way I tried to help Mitch, only to find an imposter staring back. I failed them, just as I failed Harmony. It's my fatal flaw, this misguided sense of responsibility. Months after the breakup, a deceptive calm settled over my life, a silence so profound it felt unnatural. I was on a night shift at a warehouse, the endless drone of forklifts and the smell of cardboard my new companions. Then Harmony resurfaced. Her texts, once a relentless torrent, became sporadic, almost cheerful. She shared snippets of a new life, photos from hiking trails, her pale complexion now kissed with sunlight, a faint, almost ethereal glow replacing the shadows that had once clung to her like a second skin. My cynical brain tried to find the flaw, the crack in the veneer. Was it a new addiction? A cult? My experience with Olivia, the skin carpet lady, taught me that beauty could be a meticulously crafted lie, a trap baited with illusion. Even Ethan, for all his charm, had a monstrous hunger beneath the surface. This sudden, inexplicable shift in Harmony felt equally off. One picture stood out, Harmony beaming on a cliffside, an expanse of trees and sky behind her. 5 km, new personal best, she'd written, her smile wide, almost too wide. Even then, I stared at the screen, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in my stomach. Pride warred with a deep-seated skepticism that felt like a permanent resident in my soul. Badass, I texted back, the word feeling hollow, almost sarcastic, even as I typed it. Her reply was immediate, a flurry of bubbles popping up on the screen. Got lost on the way back, spooked me a bit, but I'm fine. Lost. The word resonated with a chilling echo. I'd been lost too, in those endless, featureless roads, stalked by things that shouldn't exist, the phantom whispers, the feeling of being watched from the shadows. It was always the woods, wasn't it? The dark, ancient places where the rules of the world bent and broke. That night, she messaged again, feeling dizzy. Maybe something bit me on the hike. A sharp pang of concern, an unwanted guest, tightened its grip on my chest. Damn my conscience. You should get it checked out, I urged, the words a knee-jerk reaction to a perceived vulnerability. I will, she promised, but promises from Harmony rarely held water. Hours later, her follow-up message arrived, a single line that grated on my nerves. Doc says I'm fine, just need rest. Just need rest. I almost laughed, a dry, humorless rasp that would have surprised anyone who heard it. Rest never solved anything. It just gave the darkness time to fester, to grow. But rest didn't seem to help. Over the following week, Harmony's messages devolved from strange to genuinely unsettling. She described vivid, inescapable dreams of being chased through dense woods, the trees themselves whispering her name, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for her. It's probably just stress, I'd replied, a hollow platitude I didn't believe for a second, though her words lingered in my mind, a sour taste on my tongue. The photos she sent began to change too, subtly at first, then with an increasing, horrifying clarity. Her skin, which had seemed so healthy and glowing just days before, now appeared paler, almost translucent, as if the light were passing through it rather than reflecting off it. Her eyes, once alight with a fragile, newfound confidence, now carried a shadowed intensity, a depth that felt alien, predatory. In one photo, her smile, the one that had been too wide before, seemed strained, a rictus, as if something beneath the surface were struggling to break free, or perhaps to remain hidden. It reminded me of the mirror doppelganger, how a familiar face could hide an abyssal, unspeakable wrongness. The world was a canvas for these twisted illusions, and I was perpetually stuck in the gallery, forced to observe. Then came the phone call, late on a Tuesday night. I was halfway through a cold can of generic beer, staring at the flicker of a static-filled TV. Her voice was low, trembling, a raw nerve. "Leo," she whispered, and my name, coming from her, sounded wrong, hollowed out. "I don't feel right. I keep hearing things at night. Footsteps outside my window, scratching at my door." A shiver, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, crept down my spine. The image of the man in the walls, his presence a silent threat behind the drywall, flashed through my mind. This was the same insidious invasion, the violation of sanctuary. "Do you want me to come over?" I asked, already reaching for my keys, cursing my damnably inconvenient conscience. Every fiber of my being screamed no, but the words came out anyway, a reflex I couldn't seem to unlearn. "No," she replied, or too quickly. The word sharp, final. I don't want you to see me like this." Her refusal only deepened my unease, twisting it into a tight knot of dread. This wasn't the Harmony I knew, the one who craved constant validation, who would have begged me to come. This was something new, something chilling. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her sitting alone in her dimly lit apartment, clutching her phone with trembling hands as shadows, literal or otherwise, closed in around her. Something was profoundly wrong, and though I couldn't explain it, I knew the Harmony I once knew was slipping away, replaced by something else. This was becoming a pattern. Something always slipped away. My family, my memories, my hope. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly on the cheap nightstand beside my futon. It was a relentless vibration, a physical manifestation of my growing dread. I squinted at the screen through the gloom of my apartment. 19 missed calls, dozens of texts, a rapid-fire sequence of increasingly disturbing fragments. "I don't remember last night. There's blood. Leo, I'm scared." Panic, cold and sharp, overtook me. It was a familiar sensation, a constant companion on this long, strange journey. This was the kind of panic that burrowed deep, bypassing the cynical logic circuits and going straight for the primal fear. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, to pack the go bag and disappear into the anonymity of the highway, I found myself pulling on my worn leather jacket, the old analog watch still ticking dutifully on my wrist, and rushing out the door. My reluctant conscience, it seemed, was determined to lead me to my grave. Her apartment building stood silent, a monolithic tombstone against the gray morning sky. I took the stairs two at a time, my boots echoing hollowly in the deserted stairwell. The silence in the hallway outside her door was the first thing that truly hit me. An oppressive quiet that hung heavy in the air, thick and cloying, like dust motes suspended in a sunbeam, but somehow more sinister. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, the cool metal feeling like a promise of something terrible. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was waiting for me inside wouldn't be good. It never was. The door, somehow unlocked, creaked open with a groan that seemed to scrape against my eardrums, revealing a scene that looked like it had been ripped from the darkest corners of a nightmare. The living room was a carnival of chaos, furniture overturned, splintered wood and shattered glass glittering malevolently on the floor like scattered jewels. And then the blood. Not just a few drops, but streaks and smears. Dark, viscous handprints streaked across the walls in erratic, desperate patterns, as if someone had been trying to escape. Clawing at the very structure of the room, the metallic tang of it hung heavy in the air, a visceral assault on my senses. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't a simple domestic dispute. This was a slaughterhouse masquerading as a living room. Harmony sat hunched on the couch, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Her pale hands were clutched in her hair, pulling at the strands as if trying to rip away the memory of the night. Her eyes, shadowed and wide, darted to mine as I entered, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Fear, recognition, passing through them. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy tremble, barely audible above the ringing in my ears. I don't know what happened." "What do you mean you don't know?" My voice was rough, choked with a mix of horror and disbelief. I gestured wildly to the surrounding chaos, the shattered remnants of what had once been her life. "Look at this place. Whose blood is this?" She shook her head violently, a rapid, almost animalistic movement, tears streaming down her face, carving paths through the grime and dried blood smeared there. "I don't know. I don't remember anything after I got home last night." Her voice cracked, raw with fear, but there was something else beneath it, something cold and distant that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I hesitated, my eyes scanning the room again, my gaze lingering on the blood. It was too much for a minor injury. And the handprints, they were too large, the fingers thick and splayed. They weren't hers. A cold, sinking feeling coiled in my stomach, like a serpent waking from a long slumber. My mind, ever the survivor, pieced together the impossible. "Harmony," I said carefully, kneeling in front of her, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Who else was here?" Her gaze turned distant, unfocused, as if she were looking through me, or perhaps into some other, unseen dimension. Her breathing quickened, shallow and rapid, like a bird caught in a snare. "There was someone," she said, barely audible, her words a breathy rasp. I think they were in the woods. I saw them, but I don't remember their face. They followed me home, didn't they?" A profound chill, a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the apartment's temperature, ran down my spine as her words finally sank in. "Followed me home." The air in the apartment felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in, pressing down on me. My instinct, honed by years of running from things that defied explanation, screamed at me to get out, to grab her and drag her out of this madness, to leave this place behind and never look back. But I couldn't move, rooted to the spot, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. Questions I knew, deep down, I didn't want the answers to. It felt like standing on the edge of a void, peering into the abyss, and sensing something ancient and hungry staring back. "We need to get you out of here," I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt, a desperate attempt to impose some semblance of order on the encroaching chaos. She nodded, her movements stiff and robotic, as if fear had taken physical control of her body, turning her into a puppet. Whatever had happened here, whatever she'd seen, or whatever had done this, was far from over. This was just the prologue. My gut told me that. My gut was never wrong. I brought her to my apartment, a sterile, temporary sanctuary, hoping to keep her safe, to shield her from whatever had marked her. It was a foolish, utterly Vance-like thing to do. My go bag was already packed, waiting by the door, a silent testament to my usual modus operandi. Flee, don't engage. But I had engaged, and now I was paying for it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind outside the window, setting my teeth on edge. Around 3 a.m., the familiar prickle of dread returned, raising the hairs on my neck. I opened my eyes, staring into the oppressive darkness of my small bedroom. Harmony's bed, the futon I'd given her, was empty. The window above it stood open, letting in the damp night air. A cold knot formed in my stomach. No. 2 hours later, as the first gray light of dawn was painting the sky, a faint rustling sound reached my ears. She reappeared, slipping under the covers as if she'd never left. Her movements fluid and silent as a predator. Her hands, I noticed in the faint light filtering through the blinds, were smeared with something dark, something that glinted wetly. It wasn't blood, not exactly, but it had that unsettling sheen. She claimed it was nothing, a smudge, but the lies in her eyes screamed otherwise. A new, unsettling depth replacing the old fear. It was the same look I'd seen in the eyes of the thing that wore Mitch's face. The calm, unnerving certainty of a predator. The next day, she cooked dinner, or rather, she laid out dinner. A platter of raw, unseasoned steak, glistening under the dim kitchen light, its deep red color almost black in places. The smell was cloying, metallic. I stared at it, a wave of nausea washing over me. "You've been acting weird," I finally managed, my voice strained, my stomach doing acrobatic flips. Her head tilted, a strange, almost bird-like movement that was completely unlike the Harmony I knew. Her eyes, those deep, shadowed pools, fixed on me, unblinking. "Weird," she purred, the sound too low, too resonant for her petite frame. "I feel better than ever." Her smile, that too wide, rictus grin, stretched further, revealing teeth that seemed a little too sharp, a little too long. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, thick with an unspoken threat. It was a smile that promised something ancient and hungry, like the gods of the NDE, feasting on humanity. My patience, stretched thin by weeks of creeping dread, finally snapped. "The blood, Harmony," I said, pushing the plate of raw meat away, the sickening smell making my gorge rise. "Your disappearances, the way you're looking at me right now." "What the hell is going on?" Her calm shattered like glass. Her rage erupted, instantaneous and terrifying, animalistic and feral, a primeval force. It was the sound of something ancient, something that had shed its human skin and revealed its true monstrous form. She lunged, a sudden, impossible burst of speed. Her hands, those large, strong hands, reaching for my throat, my reflexes, honed by years of surviving the impossible, kicked in. My hands shot out, grabbing for the only weapon within reach, the long, sharp kitchen knife I'd used to cut up what I thought was dinner. The cool steel felt solid, comforting, in my trembling grasp. I brought it up, a desperate, clumsy thrust aimed at her center. The blade sank into her stomach with a sickening squelch, but she didn't stop. There was no cry of pain, no human reaction, just that guttural snarl, deepening, becoming more demonic. Her eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine, and I saw not Harmony, but something ancient and ravenous. She didn't recoil. Instead, she laughed, a dry, rasping sound, and pulled the blade out with a wet, sucking sound, as if it were nothing more than a splinter. The wound, a gaping maw in her abdomen, seemed to ripple, to close, like water disturbed by a stone. No, not like water, like flesh, unnaturally. That was my cue. I fled, my heart pounding so fiercely it felt as if it might burst, my breath ragged and shallow, the metallic scent of fresh blood filling my nostrils. My legs carried me blindly through the dimly lit hallway of my own apartment, stumbling over my own feet, my mind replaying her monstrous snarls, the impossible sight of the healing wound, and the haunting, inhuman rage in her eyes. Every shadow seemed to shift, every creak of the floorboards a threat, pushing me faster, as icy fear clawed at my chest, a desperate, animalistic need to survive. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air, the cold night breeze a shock against my sweat-soaked skin. By the time the police arrived, called by a terrified neighbor who'd heard the commotion, I was a trembling wreck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial my phone, my fingers fumbling with the numbers. My voice cracked and faltered as I tried to explain, the words coming out in disjointed fragments laced with raw panic and profound regret. I rambled about blood, about her unnatural strength, about how she wasn't herself. They looked at me with the familiar blend of pity and professional skepticism. But by then, Harmony was gone. The apartment, when they swept it, was eerily clean. No hospital had treated her wounds. No one had seen her. The bloodied sheets, which I swore had been there moments before, were nowhere to be found. The shattered window, evidence of her entry, was intact. The ruined steak dinner was gone. It was as if she had never been there, yet the lingering smell of something acrid and primal, and the fresh scars on my soul, told a different story. They looked like the remnants of a nightmare come to life. A nightmare only I could see, my signature curse. Weeks later, I was on the road again, a faceless blur in a rental truck, the scenery rushing by. A friend from my previous life, one of the few I hadn't entirely alienated, sent me a screenshot. My blood ran cold. It was her, a dating profile. Harmony. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, but with a predatory glint I recognized, a hunger that radiated from the pixelated image. Her smile, stretched wide, promised a sweetness that was a lie. Her name was listed as Harmony, but whatever she had become, it wasn't her anymore. It was something else, something that hunted, something I had wounded, but not killed. Harmony is still out there, her face smiling on dating apps, a siren luring others into her shadowed world. I can only imagine her cold, predatory gaze fixing on new prey. Her once warm laugh now a distant echo, distorted into something chilling, something that promises eternal darkness. The girl I once loved is gone, replaced by something I can't name, something that stalks the edges of my thoughts like a shadow I can't escape. And no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I'll always wonder, dread pooling in my chest like stagnant water. When will she come back for me? And will I, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman, be ready? Character count 99946.